All right, and we're live with Eduardo Ansunsolo and Steve, the armchair
The shade tree. The shade tree
shade tree. There
intellectual.
you go, shade tree. Well, he's an arm tree intellectual today,
Great.
sitting down there. Uh, I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can say it, but you got the coof, man. Not in the shop today. So, uh,
Yep.
we're
I'm
gonna.
sorry for all the viewers. You don't get to see my sexy ass walking around fixing cars today. So
There you go.
you get to see me in my other natural element.
So,
Nice.
so let's see. So you got a quarantine for 10 days or something?
Yeah, this is the second time I've had COVID, and honestly, the worst part has been the fever. It's I understand that there's some people that have a severe reaction to COVID. I am not one of those people. Um, like you'll hear me cough every once in a while, and that's the biggest part of it. Like that and the fever. And so yeah, I've got to quarantine until the 7th, and so I've got nothing but time on my hands. So
That's great.
yeah.
All right. So, Eduardo, you're with Make Justice Blind. You're out in New York. Obviously, your big issue right now is the FBI planting, creating and planting child porn evidence on a hard drive in a federal case for Keith Raniere, which I think everybody can get behind. That being a generally bad, dangerous thing for the government to be getting away with. The FBI is in the news quite a bit lately, but we'll keep the scope.
Yeah.
We'll keep the scope limited to mostly this evidence. But why don't you tell us a little bit about that? And I'm gonna actually push out that we're live here.
Yes, that's great. And if you can share a link, I guess maybe I have it already just for guests, not for guests, I'm sorry, for audience, for people who want to listen. I forgot to say that before we started.
Uh,
So
That's fine. I'm pushing it out onto Twitter right now.
great. Um, yeah, I would say, unfortunately, it's now worse. The focus will still be what you were saying, the FBI planted child porn, because it's like DNA. It's more scientific that DNA is ones and zeros, and we can prove that. But unfortunately, it became a historic case of government corruption. I think the court is involved. I know the prosecutors did criminal things. I told them, I served them an affidavit. You can watch the video on my Twitter, and they haven't responded. This is a case of collusion with private lawyers, people who lied on the stand, suborning perjury. There's all sorts of ugly, ugly things, and the worst part is it's being covered up by the media. They just won't cover it, and it's a strange pattern because all of the major networks have this. We've spoken to them, and they say yes, yes, we'll cover it, and then it goes up, and suddenly nobody knows it can't it can't be covered. So it's a case of historic government corruption that is being suppressed, that is being silenced. So
Yeah, I wonder. I wonder how many stories of government corruption being silenced there are. It's
I'm sure there's the majority are silenced. I mean, it's terrible. It feels like Russia or China with the media when you deal with them, really. You think you know what's happening with what they report, and you don't.
oh, hang on a second. Sorry about that. Can you hear me now? It looks like we got somebody coming in here. Good morning, Anya.
Good morning.
Joining us from beautiful Minneapolis, Minnesota.
It's lovely. Yes, it is.
So I think that there's certainly in the city of Minneapolis that I'm very familiar with is there seems to be kind of in Hennepin County, there seems to be a standard a government cover up seems to be a standard operating procedure. Um, uh,
Yes.
the police there's a police homicide and there's an immediate move to cover up all of the details and make sure that you can't get FISA, either that you can't get government information, that you can't get information that's supposed to be public. That department is just so underfunded and so backed up that you can't make a case against them, and they keep you tied up with even just the information problems until they're ready to prosecute you for something, in which case there's all the resources in the world available, and they can solve all of those problems. So one of the things that I want to do is I'm going to be taking some notes today, and this is a very complicated story that's very simplified by no one wants the FBI planting child porn. Boom, that's simplified. But there are these other things that are significant factors that are difficult to hold in people's minds, because it's a bunch of people and a bunch over time and a bunch of different motivations and characters. And so I want to kind of track some of that in ways that I don't have it quite as well. I also know that there's a thing that I want to talk about separate, which I believe is actually on hold, but I think it's a very interesting idea, which is sort of the legal prize.
We call it the public challenge.
The public challenge, and I'll tell you some things about the public challenge that I find very intriguing, separate from Keith's case, and perhaps I should back up.
We're gonna have today here in the podcast Tully, the lawyer of Keith. Yep. Sunil Chakraborty, who designed the challenge with Keith, yep, who also worked with Dr. Kuiper, and it was Sunil who helped Keith to uncover the tampering. So all of these things that you're talking about, we'll have Mark Elliott, Nikki Klein, she might join. So we'll have the people that are intrinsically involved with all these subjects. They're going to come today. So, but yeah, the challenge, we can definitely discuss that. I can, you can present it and I can give you how it came about.
Well, and I'll tell you one of the things that I find interesting about this opportunity, right? And I don't know Keith, but I would imagine that even him in his situation right now, he's looking at this as an opportunity to make the world better, right?
Yes, we have a big spotlight. There's this big corruption. So, what do you do with the spotlight? So he's been thinking about this, and that's why he maintains his innocence, because even if they were to offer him some sort of plea, this needs to be exposed, and that's what we're going to do with the spotlights, expose all of these levels of the government corruption.
Well, and whether or not people like Keith Raniere, or whether or not they like his business model or what he was doing or his lifestyle, that's distinct from whether or not that's illegal, or whether or not he had a free trial. Those are distinct. Distinct concerns.
And I think Keith talks about it in the first episode, if I'm not mistaken, of the podcast that we're going to be promoting, that we're going to be discussing.
Okay.
He gives the analogy of Hitler, and it is true. You know that a society is civilized. If Hitler, let's say he's accused falsely of robbery, he needs to go free, even if he's Hitler. If it's a false accusation, that is how you know a civilized country, a civilized, just system.
Exactly. And I know that would make some people very uncomfortable.
Yeah, right? But everyone. It doesn't mean that I would feel good, to be the prosecutor that lets Hitler free, but it is the principle. It is bigger than Hitler.
So the other thing that I think is an interesting opportunity with this is we've got a very smart guy who's in prison, and he's actually in prison with a couple of other very smart guys. One in particular in that same prison is Ross Ulbricht from Silk Road, who, for the life of him, cannot understand what he's in prison for. uh, uh, I think Keith is in prison for making the wrong enemies. Frankly, that's my take on the legal case, and then having a bunch of moral issues dumped on him. People didn't like certain things, and then frankly, a bunch of it is verifiable lies. Like that's not, and I think he'll go into that. But one of the things that I think is
and that's what the challenge does is it brings the focus back into what evidence there was to prove what charges, and there's no elements that are met. Not one single element of one single charge.
In Minneapolis, we had a very famous case. Not famous because of its rarity, but famous because it became part of a presidential. It stymied Amy Klobuchar's presidential bid, where the accusation was that this young man, Mayan Burrell, had murdered this young girl, and the accusation was so egregious that it kind of tarred this guy, even though they convicted him with for practical purposes, no evidence. The girl was dead. That was true. That was verifiable. She was dead, but he was in his room playing video games. And there was no evidence, and he was convicted. He spent 16 years in prison and was finally released after Amy Klobuchar was called out on it on the daytime television show The View as being the worst case that Sonny Hostin had ever seen. And the reason I make this comparison is because the things that Keith was accused of are egregious. They're terrible. They're morally reprehensible. But there wasn't any evidence for it. And so one of the things that I think is interesting about this case is we have a very, very smart man who's in prison, who's from a class where that wouldn't usually happen, right? We can be frank. He's highly educated. He's
white and male.
Well, I kind of think that that's bullshit. I think that that's kind of bullshit, and it's one of the things that I think is an interesting let's take the male for a second. Men have 60% same crime penalties than women do. Right?
I think before Johnny Depp, it was very hard to advocate for any male on any abuse accusation situation.
100%. And if you were to reverse the gender,
even Amber was trying to say, "Oh, the powerful white."
That's a shell game. So being white and male, that's a really curious story that's told by a bunch of credentialed people with money.
Yeah.
The people with money love that story. Why? Because then it shifts the attention away from, oh, are you suggesting that people with money get treated differently? Maybe we should talk about that. But Keith Raniere is a guy who has education and he has money and still got railroaded. And what's interesting about this is, in addition to being a white and male and having money, is he's also a very smart guy. I've read his patents. I've read all of his patents. And these are some very clever, novel ideas, and executing on technical patents or even media patents, as some of them, I guess you would sort of say are. That's a very technical process, a very difficult process, and you can't do that if you're not a smart person. But he has seen, and I think we'll hear this in the recordings, is he has seen how this process is broken. And I think by looking at how this process got a Keith Raniere wrapped up, we can find out ways that we might be able to improve this process for everyone. We want to have a safe society, but we want to have a safe society that looks rationally at the costs. And the costs of mass incarceration, by which I don't just mean the amount of money that it costs to keep somebody in prison, right? But the costs to the family, the costs to society, the costs of lost productivity. And I think Keith Raniere is a unique opportunity for us to look at
You
those.
know what was true about the white male thing in my quest, in my journey on this, was that when we started to look for help, the there was not the association for affluent white males that are wrongfully convicted. That didn't exist. There was a lot of support.
Or poor white males for that.
Right. Black Lives Matters was at its peak. It was almost offensive, when I would try to be like, "Hey, I have a white man in justice." It would be like, no. I found, Hispanic wrongfully convicted women, African American women who wrongfully convicted. There's a lot of help out there, but not for the white smart guy. So anyway, and
Right, yeah.
you're right. I think it is a construct that it's used, but it ends up having real effects.
Well, and frankly, it's used by wealthy, credentialed people who want to signal that they care so much about this small minority of people, right? But it's like they don't give a shit about the majority of people. And isn't that a quaint little trick that they can blame these problems on somebody like me or Steve, or increasingly someone like Anya or Jewel. So I'm going to play this first recording. Give me a second here. I'm going to play this first recording and let's see what Steve Raniere has to say.
And the person that has recorded all these calls, it's Keith's power of attorney,
Okay.
and his personal friend. His name is Sunil Chakraborty. He is, one of the partners that Make Justice Blind. He is highly responsible for what we have now, for having uh, caught the FBI cheating and the prosecutors. Sunil has a lot of talents, and that's who you will be hearing.
Okay, and you you have a copy of the there's what is it, a signed affidavit from the FBI investigators that
Yes, it's in Make
explains their
Justice in Make
investigation.
Justice Blind. What I do with people is, or in my video on Twitter, I share the link to Make Justice Blind. Maybe
Okay.
it hasn't been as effective, but yeah, if you want to bring it up, it will be there.
Okay, we'll get that. But first,
Yeah, and I can look for it too.
first I'm going to play this recording from
Great.
Steve or from Keith.
For people who may listen to this, there'll be a whole range of people. There are going to be a lot of people who think I'm horrible, and they're going to be.
Can you guys hear
Barely
that?
audible. Barely
It's very
audible.
soft.
Going to be probably a very small.
That's my maximum audio on this, unfortunately.
Oh,
All right, everybody,
Okay.
turn up your volume on your end, and hopefully that works.
Rationally, if possible, or as many people as possible, because what's going on here is a much bigger issue. One of the things with this, I guess, if I were to say a little quote, it would be in our country, Hitler doesn't stand a chance of surviving a false robbery charge. In this case, and there are people who dislike me for all sorts of reasons, and probably a lot of them valid. Most of the ones I've seen are not valid, but there's certainly a lot of reasons someone could not like someone like me. But as much as I might be disliked, when something is not valid under the law.
Morning, Leander. Can you guys hear this in the comments?
Than whatever people might think of me. In my case, not only do I believe I'm innocent, and all the people that I've had analyze the case believe I'm innocent, but the procedures done have been very bad. For me, in my life, I've always tried to do good things, and I always felt I rose to sort of a low level of doing good things. Nothing medium or very high. You have the people, the Gandhis, the Martin Luther Kings, all those great people of the world, and I'm nowhere near that in what I've been able to achieve. Yet, in this particular case, I'm given a spotlight that is far greater than my personhood. And the question is, what do you do? I mean, in this particular case, it's a grave injustice, and I'm given this big spotlight. And what we need to do is show the injustice, no matter what a person thinks of me. And my hope is, probably at the end of these podcasts or things along those lines, there'll be people who really liked me before the podcast and maybe won't like me after. And then there'll be some people who really didn't like me before the podcast and maybe like me more. But what I do hope is there will be someone who really doesn't like me, but will stand with me in this injustice, because this injustice affects far more than me. And it affects even far more than the hundreds of thousands of people that are in prison or have been in prison. It affects every person. And before I, got into this situation, I had no idea. I was so backward and ignorant. And now I know a little more. There's a quote from a book, and it's very interesting. It's between Thomas More and Will Roper. The book's called A Man for All Seasons by Robert Bolt, or the literary piece, I should say. And Thomas More says, "And go as he should, if he were the devil himself, until he broke the law." And Will Roper says, "So now you would give the devil the benefit of the law?" And Thomas More says, "Yes, what would you do? Cut a road through the law to get after the devil? That means just break down the laws and go after the devil?" And Roper says, "Yes, I would cut down every law in England to do that." And Thomas says, "Oh, and when the last law was down and the devil turned round on you, where would you hide, Roper? All the laws being flat. This country is planted thick with laws from coast to coast. Man's laws, not God's. And if you cut them down..."
This call is from a federal prison.
"And you're just the man to do it. Do you really think you could stand upright in the winds that would blow then? Yes, I would give the devil the benefit of the law for my own safety's sake. And in this country right now, the devil doesn't have the benefit of the law. And in many ways, I'm seen to be the devil. For this particular series of podcasts, I want to divide it into two sections. One, we'll have discussions about me being the devil, all the bad things people think, and what I would say about them. And the other side is discussing the law and how it affects me and my conduct and what I've allegedly done. And in that case, we're actually putting out a contest, and we're going to take $25,000, and we're going to go through charge by charge. And the first person, if you will, who can show that my charge meets the elements of the charge, my conduct meets the elements of the charge, wins the $25,000. And then for people who can write essays on why my conduct doesn't fit the charge, we have $10,000 of prizes for the top, I believe it's 3 essays. So we're actually paying more than double for someone to find that somehow I meet the elements of these charges. And I would invite anyone out there, including lawyers, prosecutors, jurors, the judge, my prosecutors, and if people need their name held anonymously or anonymous, or if indeed the court has ordered that, we will hold the names anonymous to protect people, but have them look at the charges. This just happens to be a situation where out there in the media, really there's no voice that says I'm good, that says I'm nice, that likes me, or that analyzes things from a different perspective other than one of what I will call hate. All of us, I think, have caught a real infection of hate. My hope is, if you analyze what my lawyers have always said and the way we presented information, we try to do it honorably and without hate. But that's been what's been done on the other side. And we need to look at this. The Lady Justice is supposed to be blind. She's supposed to have a blindfold on and not have people like politicians and media whispering in her ears. Lady Justice being blind is the most important thing. And we have to treat people that we love and we want to exonerate from charges the exact same way we treat people who we hate and we want to indict and we want to convict. So those that we want to convict get the same benefits as those that we would never convict, but they've been charged. And we want to show what's going on in the justice system. You know, a statistic that I heard that amazed me, there are people on death row. These are people that are waiting to be executed. And 1 out of 9 of them is supposedly innocent. Can you imagine that? In this country, 1 out of 9. And if for such a serious charge, where people go and they analyze the charge because someone's life is on the line, if 1 out of 9 times we're wrong, imagine lesser charges. Imagine more politically motivated things. My charges come in a time where the climate is really not good. You know, you have Epstein's, you have Weinstein's, you have the Me Too movement, you have all of these different things going on, and a lot of it's legitimate. Women have been treated terribly in this country and in the world, but in particular in this country, by people of power, by people like me. But that doesn't mean that I did those things. And it certainly doesn't mean that I'm guilty of these charges. You know, one of the things for people who may listen to this, you know, there'll be a whole range of people. There are going to be a lot of people who think I'm horrible, and there are going to be some people who they don't know what this is, and then there are going to be probably a very small group of people that think I'm good or like me. I'm looking to get everyone to listen rationally, if possible, or as many people as possible, because what's going on here is a much bigger issue. You know, one of the things with this, I guess, if I were to say a little quote, it would be in our country, Hitler doesn't stand a chance of surviving a false robbery charge. In this case, and, you know, there are people who...
I think it's repeating.
I think it looped. Sorry about that. I thought it maybe.
No, it's okay.
All right, so there's
I
a
was
couple
muted.
of things. There's a couple of things that immediately come back to me on this. And this was in 2019 that this was originally recorded. Is that right?
Correct.
And
it seems like it's still true.
I'd be interested to see actually how his opinions on this might have changed. Here's a claim that he makes that is really interesting to me. Women have been treated horribly in the world. Agreed. All human beings have been treated horribly in the world, but particularly in this country. Really? That's an interesting attitude, Mr. Raniere. Are the people the women in America treated worse than the women in Mexico, based on your observations?
I think it's different. I think in some ways, yes, the third world has a much more savage aspect to what you're describing. I agree with you. I think, or I guess guessing by how I know Keith or what I think he means is in America, what's worse is that it's sort of hidden. In other words, it seems like women have been liberated and they have the same rights as men and everything is equal. And it's not true at all. There's injustices in both sides. In some ways, women are awful to men, and men certainly keep women in some sort of status. And I think what he means by worse, especially in this country, it's how it's protected. You know, you go to a Middle Eastern country and you see a women covered in some ways, and, you know, it's pretty overt what goes on. And here, things are hidden, sort of with like the justice system. It's worse here, not because if you go to Mexico, you wouldn't see something savage and horrible. Of course you would. But in Mexico, we joke about it. We know about it. We talk about it. Everyone knows that if you're poor, you go to jail. There's no justice. But in America, and the way the rest of the world sees America, we have the best, most just justice system. And that lie, that illusion, that cover-up makes it worse. So I think that's
probably true, but I think that there's also a very powerful story that has narrative that has run through the credential class, which is that America's the most horrible place that women have ever lived, and it's like nothing.
Yeah,
like that.
I think it's people use that for victimization, and I agree with you is wrong. But I think that if you analyze philosophically what happens with women, they are still limited. And then we worked sort of with the Me Too movement, in my opinion, and things like that to make it look like now they're powerful. And I don't know if that's true. And I think that the ways in that they are powerful are not good either. This new wave of Me Too and being able to damage someone's life with no due process, I think that's bad. And I think that that's a good question to focus on because I know, I have some disagreements with Keith's opinions and whatever, but I think
Which we all have in a rational society, right? Like that's the whole
right,
purpose of free speech.
right. And this is why we're here to dialogue them out. But I think that, explaining a little bit of the challenge would be good. But first, I don't know. I would like to hear from you guys when you think of that, Hitler, the devil. Doesn't matter who it is, Charles Manson, Mr. Rogers, Keith Raniere, you know, due process is the most important thing. Lady Justice being blind. What do people think of that?
Well, and that is giving the devil the benefit of the law um, is I think it's a significant idea, and I think it's the key idea in that first intro, which is uh, uh, let's say hypothetically everything horrible about Keith Raniere is true,
Yes.
or everything that's believed and everything that's been said is true. Uh, do we really want to live in a society where we don't give the devil the benefit of the law? Because it's the minute we short ourselves on due process, we expose ourselves to the devil turning on us.
Right.
So I thought that was a very thing. To be honest, I think the devil is a better analogy than Hitler because people,
Yes.
in our minds, Hitler is worse than the devil.
I think that
I don't know how that works exactly. But
no, I think it might be because Hitler is real, and the devil is still can be viewed as this construct. So that might be why. I agree. The devil is a good example because this is something that is hard to talk about. Even if everything that was said, even if all the charges were true, what the FBI did, it dismisses the whole case.
Well, and the thing that's very disturbing to people is which story is easier and more comfortable to believe. Um, do I want to believe uh, that there's this cult leader out there who was having a orgiastic sex cult with these beautiful, fantastic
And
women,
now he's behind bars.
and now he's behind bars? Or do I want to think that, oh, maybe this guy actually had some useful information that was only available to a select group of executives, that was difficult and challenging to go through, uh, and the FBI planted child porn and the
Right.
prosecutors included? It's like, one of those stories is very uncomfortable. One of those stories feels good.
Right. And plus, you don't want to distrust your FBI. But think about it. I think that the devil already has turned round on us. In other words, we've allowed what happened to Keith ever, even before. In other words, if someone looks enough like a monster in the media, I will look the other way when the FBI plants evidence on him. We don't say this, but we believe this. Most people believe that if someone is bad enough, it's okay. The FBI can't cheat. And that is the devil turning around on us because now all of these women, let's say, who supported that will have a son or a nephew or a brother that some women, and women know that women do this, are going to make them look like the devil even if they're not. And the justice system won't be there anymore because we created this standard where anything goes. When it's the devil, when it's an abusive, powerful man, anything goes, no due process. And then we realize that the real power of the devil, which is, the media can collude with the government and make anyone look like the devil. And then the FBI will plant child porn on them, and society will look the other way. But that is the devil.
Well, and to make some allowance for my earlier critique of Keith saying, Women were treated horribly, especially in this country. The timing is significant, and his position are also significant, right? Like in 2019, nobody wanted to come out and say Amber Heard is probably lying. Women
Right.
lie all the time. Nobody wanted to say that, and a guy who's in prison for 120 years, who's trying to persuade people, is in 2019 is probably not going to tell you what's actually on his mind. He's going to temper that for the times.
No, you're talking about in this case and that time, 2 years, 3 years ago, there's a whole community of people who knows that India Oxenberg and Sarah Edmondson and all of them are lying. We know it. People have tons of proof and texts and videos, and it's incredible. And yet people couldn't go forward with it because they would have been not only defamed, but in the court, they'll get you for RICO. And the lawyers would tell us it doesn't matter what you know. The way they build this case, you go and you talk, they're going to arrest you. So,
well, this is one of the biggest criticisms of the RICO Act that there has ever been, is that by incorporating RICO into the judicial system, you thereby inherently invite corruption into the very system that you don't want corruption in.
correct. So,
You want to elaborate on that, Steve? Because I think you're bringing up an interesting point.
So the problem with RICO is that you can prosecute someone who has not technically, as far as you are aware, has broken a law. Now, my understanding of RICO is weak at best. But what I do know is that one of the reasons why it was so, how would you put it? It was so productive is that you could bring down the mafia. You could bring down all the members of the mafia by hearsay alone. That's dangerous as hell.
Right.
It's guilt by association. That's what RICO is.
Right.
Is guilt by association.
And that is what happened in this case. They were all convicted on prejudice. The challenge
it's so antithetical to the principles of justice.
The opposite.
It's an affront on the very nature, the very idea of what justice is. So it's because I've had friends in biker clubs and I've known a few rough people in my time, and I've been able to have conversations with them about it, and they've all been like, yeah, change the way that we even just have fun as a group of people, because we have to understand that anything that we do can send the rest of us into prison, and we didn't even do anything wrong. We weren't even there, right? So it invites in a certain degree of corruption, and I mean corruption in the sense of corruption of spirit, corruption of mind, corruption of honestly, the bastardization of the idea of justice being blind itself has been corrupted by the RICO Act.
Yes. The justice, Lady Justice, is not blind anymore. That is the state of things. And that's the name. We need to make justice blind again.
Well, I think she's deaf, dumb, and blind at this point.
Yes. So, and I think that in a lot of ways, it is us. It is the fault of us, we the people. We have allowed this delusion that is comfortable, where the government will, clean itself, where if we vote for the right person and we, pay the right taxes, things will be fair and justice will be blind. And that is just not true. It has never been true. Every time a society has changed to have a justice system, is the people make it so. It's not, the senators and the politicians who change laws every 10 years, and maybe one day in 150 years we'll have, that's just not how it happens. It is by people when the people bring public accountability, things change.
Yeah.
Well, and in 2016, half the country was convinced that there had just been foreign interference in our election and that it was all corrupt. And then in 2020, the other half of the population became convinced that there was foreign election in our foreign interference in our elections, and that the whole system was corrupt. And it's like,
Yeah.
for once, over these 4 years, I'm like, my God, I agree with all of you people for once. So this idea that we're going to vote our way out of this, I don't think is really.
That is believing in Santa Claus. You know, the belief that you'll vote and then go to sleep, and tomorrow there'll be justice and things will be good. That's not how things happen.
Well, the part that I have to illustrate here is that we don't live in a free society. We never have. We've tried to live up to the idea of being members of a free society, right? It's the goal that we're all trying to get to. It's just like meritocracy. We know that merit is the best measuring tool for ability, for oh, good grief, words, competency,
Skill.
right? Skill. We know that is the best
Societal
outcome.
productivity.
Yeah, societal productivity. But we know that merit isn't always there, right? We have nepotism, we have oligarchies, right? But we understand that the best outcome is merit. So we try to continuously push towards meritocracy. We try to continuously push towards a free and egalitarian society. But we are mistaken if we think that we live in that. So the whole point is to continuously, progressively move forward towards that ideal. And when you have things like RICO, or you have things like FBI interference into a prosecution, it kicks us back 800 steps from where we were today. And that's the biggest sin out of all of this shit. To put words succinctly here, is what they've done is they've set us back so far. And that's why it's so important that we don't bastardize the law, that we don't violate the law, is because the law is, in one of the senses, a path forward towards a free and egalitarian society, one built off of merit, one built off of ability, one built off of competency, and they screwed us. That's why it hurts so much. That's why the FBI hurt everybody, not just Keith Raniere. Now, Keith Raniere might be guilty of every single other thing, and it still does not dissuade us from the idea that planting evidence is wrong. It's wrong on every single level of a free society.
Right.
So even if we were to reverse that and be like, see, the FBI lied, he still deserves to be in prison, but this can't be evaded. We can't allow that to happen, where we allow the government to intrude upon civil and criminal law just to get what they want, because that is the definition of tyranny.
Yeah. And then there is a strange logical point, to get back into, I agree with you. I don't think the focus should be the innocence or the guilt of Keith. I think that is already, a distraction. It should be the FBI planted child porn. I think you're correct. But there is an interesting point of, and people ask this all the time, why would the FBI plant evidence? And, it's a difficult notion to admit that maybe it's because they didn't have any. Or, what's the other possibility? That they had a ton of evidence? This is the devil. And so you must have a bunch of evidence, and the FBI is good at looking for it. And yet there was nothing. They had to plant it. Or maybe they had a bunch, but then for fun, they just planted some more. That's not how things happen. You plant it. You cheat because you can't win otherwise. But to entertain that, it's like, it's entertaining Keith's innocence, which at this point, it's very incorrect for people to even go there.
Why climb Mount Everest? Because you can. Because you can. right? And that's basically what, if all of this is true, which I you know, my libertarian instincts are kind of like pinging my spidey sense here, is that it is true. You've got the evidence, apparently, right? You've got the evidence from forensic scientists that looked at the hard drive. We know that the files were changed after the drive came into the FBI's
Custody, yeah. And the
Thank
FBI
you,
agent
custody.
at trial testified that.
Right. So why not really solidify the outcome if you can, right? And that's what they did, which I find abominable. I find that so detestable, because everything that we've talked about here is the law is the last bastion of protection against us and the devil, so to speak.
Right.
And to make sure that this is clear for the audience, thanks for everybody joining us. The motion here isn't even to exonerate Keith Raniere. It's to get a new trial because of the tampered evidence. Is that right? It's a Rule 33 motion.
Yes, and what we want, it's an evidentiary hearing. Yes, we want a new trial. Really, the only vacatur is the only real solution. All the charges of all the defendants should be dismissed because the FBI planted evidence. It's that simple. But the process, the strategy is to file these Rule 33s where things are exposed, not only the tampering but lies by the witnesses, perjury, suborning perjury by the prosecution, and all of these things are coming. If you go towards a new trial, we would have to go by an evidentiary hearing, and that's what we want. We want to ask questions. We don't just want things to be, if they offered it to us in the appeal, just be quiet. No. We want to interrogate all of these agents. We want to talk to the prosecutors. We want them to understand, why did you did this? Who authorized this? Why this? Why that? Why that? The people's right is to have these questions answered. So what we want is evidentiary hearings where all of the people involved are questioned.
That's no part of that seems unreasonable. No part of that seems unreasonable.
It's the only reasonable thing to do. I say it on Twitter. People call me crazy because I'm trying to indict agents and prosecutors. People are crazy not to do that. That is our citizens' job. It is the very structure of the government. So.
All right, give me a second here, and I'm going to run the next audio. The volume on this, everybody, is very low, so we're going to try and shut up, but we're going to go to this. There is one thing that I wanted to suggest in here before we listen to this, and I'm wondering how Keith would handle this now, given that this is a year and a half or almost 2 years old. But he keeps referring to innocence. And this is a thing that is something that I think is a huge problem in our cultural zeitgeist, we'll call it, is we talk about whether or not a person is innocent. And there is no such thing, or we misuse the term. I don't want to say there's no such thing. We misuse the term because in terms of what happens in a court of law is you're found guilty or not guilty. And that seems semantic to people, but it's really significant because it's the state's job in a prosecution to find the truth and to determine not whether somebody is innocent, because that's an impossibility, but to find out whether there's enough evidence to proclaim that they are guilty or there is not enough evidence and they are found not guilty. And people use this term, and Keith uses in the stream to say I'm innocent. And what that does is it automatically triggers this thing of, well, but I heard you had 2 girlfriends. Doesn't have anything to do with the court case. Doesn't have anything to do with anything. But it's like, but I heard this spooky music. You're clearly not innocent. And it's like, really, it's like I said, it seems semantic. But when somebody proclaims their innocence, they're opening themselves up to a reaction that shouldn't exist. because what he should be saying is, myself and my co-defendants are not guilty. We're not guilty. You may or may not like anything else, but we're not guilty of the crimes that are charged.
Yes, and which brings me to the challenge. We're close to launching it, and I need your help as far as getting a judge. And the judge is going to be judging the essays, not the case. And this is a simple thing. What we want is for people to create a separation between what was prejudice and hearsay and all the things you described, and the law. What are the pieces of evidence that the prosecution brought that meet each element of each charge? The latter becomes completely blurred and hidden behind the prejudice, and prosecutors know this. You dirty someone enough within the trial, and then in this case the media helps, and it doesn't matter that you don't meet the elements of the charge. People are shocked to hear, for example, that there's no sex, no violence. Keith is not accused of touching anyone. The sex act is him watching two women in their mid-20s having oral sex. That is sex trafficking. That is the thing people are shocked to learn these things. Because why? Because the media said there's rape and children, and none of that is in the case.
That's like the number one searched porn parameter in the United States.
Right.
Is lesbian porn.
So that's we're all guilty. Right.
Among men and women.
Yes.
Right.
So in the challenge, what you get is, for example, and this is the first one that is almost ready, interstate commerce, which is one of the elements of sex trafficking. Moira Pensa, the lead prosecutor, says in her summation at the end, we know that this is the evidence that meets interstate commerce. She must have taken a bus or an Amtrak that day of the sex act, because that's one of the elements. The person has to be there for that day for the sex act. And then you look at the transcript, there's no evidence whatsoever that she took an Amtrak or a bus. And furthermore, her witness, Nicole, in her testimony says, oh no, I slept the night before on Allison's bed. So she says the opposite of what the prosecutor says meets the element of interstate commerce. So in the challenge, you go and you see these things, and it's simple. It's like, okay, I want $25,000. I'm going to prove that interstate commerce did happen. And then you're like, well, no, it didn't. So next. And all of them will be like that. If somebody finds, to the standard of a judge, an independent person who will analyze these essays, they can win $25,000. But if they can't, and they won't, because they'll see no element is met. And then they can start writing, and okay, you know what? This person is innocent because right here it says, Nicole says she did not travel that day. So this element is bogus and it's not met. The best essays explaining that will get prizes. So I need someone to judge it, a lawyer, preferably someone well-known, but if not, someone who is willing. It's like a teacher at a school. You take essays and you're like, okay, this person is spot on why he's innocent. This is a good essay. Or no, this person says they're guilty because what you just said, Troy, this person is guilty because they're so despicable. He abused many women. Okay, well, that's not, the judge will be like, okay, well, that does not prove him guilty. So we will have a judge that will pick the best innocence essays, or would testify that someone did correctly assign guilt to the elements of the charge. Is that clear?
We should get Ellen Dershowitz to do it.
Yeah, and things like that, people like that are in motion. And we have talked with people that have big credentials who could judge it and stuff like that. But I think that here we can do a test, where you can, find someone who would do maybe with a group of students one of the elements and things like that. So,
can I add something, Troy, real quick?
Go ahead, and then we've got Joseph Tully coming in with us too.
Great.
Sweet. So something that I've learned in the last couple of years is something I read was the mark of an educated mind is to be able to take two competing ideas and hold them in your head at the same time.
Right.
Right. So that's extremely difficult to do. And that's why it's a well-educated mind, right? The more you know, the less you know, or the less confidence you have in what you do know. Take, for example, this. Like, I don't know who Keith Raniere is, and I highly distrust everyone involved in the case, because I like to believe that our judicial system works, right? But that doesn't mean that I can't, for a moment, suspend my belief in that and move it over to disbelief for the fact of trying to understand that there may be something going on that I am committing myself to an illusory idea of. So I think it's beneficial when we're having these conversations to make that distinction, is to say, hey, look, you can look at the papers, you can look at the work, you can look at the articles, you can look at the lawsuits and the criminal trials, and you can still at the same time say, well, is that everything? Is that all that we know? Is this all that's being manifested to either prove guilt or not guilt? And it's an incredibly difficult thing to do, and that's why I wanted to talk to the viewers for a moment and say, I know it's tough, it's really difficult, but if we're going to have really good results, and we're going to have really good conversations around these type of things, we have to be able to hold two different ideas in our heads, two competing ideas, and to draw out the truth from both of those.
All right, we're
Yes.
being joined not only by a lawnmower in my back here, but Joseph Tully, who I believe, are you the lead attorney for the case?
Yes.
I am, yes.
And how long have you been with? How long have you been representing Keith Raniere in this case?
So I came in as attorney of record in the federal case, I think November of 21.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
And if I can say 1 second of
Go ahead.
something about Tully,
please.
you know, it's been a challenge to find lawyers that are, willing to say things, call them by what they are, that they have a certain amount of advocacy and bravery. And, Tully is the perfect advocate, the perfect lawyer for someone, because he's not afraid of calling things for what they are. And he's been not only incredibly knowledgeable and able to manage the legal aspects of the case, but he's someone who is not afraid of leaning forward for a cause, and that has been incredibly inspiring for everyone around him. So thank you, Tully, and thank you for coming.
I'm interested if you could give us some of your personal background and then your background with the case and where the case is at. I'll give you the floor for a little bit to kind of educate us on the legal elements.
Okay, sure. So in terms of my background, I passed the bar in 1999. I originally wanted to go into high tech law. That was, the internet was just blossoming at that time, and it would have been perfect timing. I moved to Fresno, and there wasn't any tech legal jobs there. And the only job that I could get was at the public defender's office. And initially I was kind of crushed. I didn't know criminal law. I didn't respect it. I, had barely studied it in law school. But after taking the job, I just fell in love with it within a matter of, days. It's just the greatest joy of my life, I think, representing people who are accused of crimes. And it's taught me so much in how to live and how to be a better person. I think this job, and when your job kind of makes you a better person every day and forces you, then I think it's just a great position to be in. So that's kind of how I got into criminal law. I never really had a drive or any ambition to get into it. I fell into it by accident, and I'm just really happy I'm here. I went private in 2001. After getting a lot of experience at the public defender's office. In 2018, I published a book called California State of Collusion, and it's basically airing all the dirty laundry of our criminal justice system. And it's focused specifically on California, but I think the same principles apply all across the country. and it went to #1 on Amazon. But the book can basically be summed up into a few phrases that everybody knows. Power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. So those are people that get in the system who have good intentions. They still get corrupted. But a lot of times, power attracts bad people. So when we have positions of power, we have to be aware that bad people are attracted to those positions. So, #1, we have a lot of bad people getting into positions of power. And #2, even the good people are going to get corrupted over time. So it just, we have a lot of work to do in our criminal justice system. And I'm glad to be here and be a part of positive solutions and moving forward.
Excellent. So tell us how you came to represent Keith Raniere, maybe who your team is, where you're at. And obviously, you don't want to share too much about what your strategy is, but how did we get here? Where are we at?
Okay, so I was hired. I think just reputation. I've won. I've had a lot of very good luck. I work very hard in my jury trials, and I have a very good reputation. I work very hard for my clients, and I think that the group found out about me, and I came in, and I do have my own law firm. I have very talented associates. I'm training them all in litigation techniques and strategies that I've developed over the past 2 decades of being in private practice. And so we're really a well-oiled machine geared to stop injustice. So that's where we're at right now in terms of legal strategy or legal procedure. Do you want me to get into what is on the books right now?
I'm interested, sort of. Obviously, you've looked through the transcripts. You've seen what evidence was presented. You've looked into that. If you're obviously looking forward, if you're trying to present a man who's been wrongly convicted, we're all here familiar with the thing that we're sort of pushing on the drumbeat, which is the FBI planted and created child porn evidence. That's everyone should be concerned about that. But what are maybe like the top 3 or top 5 other things that people should be aware of that were problematic in this case?
So in terms of the actual case and all the transcripts, I've really been very narrowly focused on the tampering issue because I don't know much about Nexium as a group. Everybody that I've met has been very nice, but I'm very narrowly focused on the tampering issue. And you're right, it is very, very concerning. It boils down to the FBI manufactured child porn and planted it on Mr. Ranierie. And that is something that everybody should be concerned about. And there's not only the initial crime of creating the child porn and planting it, but then there's the cover up often can be worse than the crime. So the perjury at trial, lying in order to cover up their tracks and what they did. We have very specific instances of at least one FBI agent saying things about technical details of the case that simply aren't true, that he, should have known better. And so, there's the initial crime, and then there's the cover up as well. And we have evidence of all of that.
And that evidence is all going to be, if you get it's a motion for an evidentiary hearing. Is that right? That's where you're
correct
at right now.
Yes.
And what's the state of that?
So there's an appeal that was filed before I came into the case. So think about it. There's a trial court down here, and then after a trial, there's an appeal. So that's at a higher level. And there's an appeal that was filed in this case before I came in, although I did file a supplement to it. So that would be at the appellate court level. A motion for a new trial based on the tampering has to be filed with the trial court. So the
Yep.
same judge who heard the actual trial, or at that level, that's the district court level versus the appellate court level. So right now, because the appellate court is deciding on the appeal, the
Yep.
motion that I filed for a new trial is sort of frozen in the district court right now.
So it's sort of complicating. Are those two things complicating each other? Or they're I'll just put it frankly, because I think that the hour is getting late, and we should all talk truthfully. Obviously, the judge doesn't want to hear that there was some problem with some decision he made, and you're going to bring a bunch of attention to it. So you file a motion for an emotion for a retrial. That's going to, he and his buddies hate that story.
Correct.
So then there's the appeals court, which is hypothetically a different entity. It's not, but it should be hypothetically a different set of people.
It is. It's three judges that are different than the trial judge in a different courthouse. So
there's an appeal that's gone on. Is that a different set of attorneys, or are you also working that appeal now?
No, I argued the appeal,
Okay.
and we're waiting to hear back from the appellate court at this time.
And so, to make sure I've got this correct, and I don't want to misrepresent it, in the appeal court, in the appeal situation, there's a presumption of guilt at that point. You have a much higher barrier to try and affect any change in an appeals court, because he's already convicted. We don't have to even give him the presumption of innocence. Is that just for the appeal?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the presumption of innocence happens at a trial. And, if you were to look statistically at appeals, very few appeals get granted. And if you were to look at case law that's developed from, we get case law from appellate courts, right? So when something happens in trial, an attorney will bring it to an appellate court saying, hey, this judge did something that wasn't right. This judge let in all this evidence that was prejudicial that had nothing to do with the case. And then the appellate court reviews what the trial court did. And, it's just overwhelming odds that the appellate court is going to approve what the trial court did, especially if it leads to a conviction. Basically, appellate courts are in the business of preserving convictions, right, wrong, whatever. That's what, if appellate court decisions were, if you could bet on them, you would just make all the money in the world by betting against somebody accused of a crime or somebody convicted. So they basically, for the last 40 years, they have a track record of eviscerating our Constitution and our constitutional rights.
And okay, so that's the appeal. That's the state of the appeals court. And I'm going to want to come back to that because I want to hear what the arguments were there. But I do want to come back down to this lower court where you've done a motion for a new trial. And what is the status of the motion for the new trial?
It's on ice because of the appeal. So we have the appeal in the appellate court, and I filed the motion for a new trial, and the trial court said, we're not going to touch this until the appellate court is done.
They're passing the buck off.
They froze it on ice. Yes.
So, and the appeal process could take years, or it could take decades, presumably.
Not decades, but it could take a long time.
Do you have any recourse before we get back to the appeal? Then, do you have any recourse in terms of them claiming this conflict or passing it off? Meaning they're passing the buck. The lower court's passing the buck to the higher court, which there's obviously an argument for that, right? We don't want to deal with it because there's a higher court that's already taking it, and the higher court has stronger, more power than the lower court.
But they are two separate issues. So the tampering motion was in the trial court, but other motions like this and this and this happened in the trial. That's in the appeal. So the appellate court does not have any of the tampering issues right now.
And can you enter new evidence such as that into your appeal? It would be highly unlikely, or unusual, I would think, because typically we're relitigating the lower court's decision in an appeal, right?
Correct. Yes. Yeah. So we're looking at what the trial judge did and what the government did in an appeal. And the tampering is based on new evidence. And so the appellate court is basically looking at the record, right? They're reading the transcripts and that kind of thing. Yep. It's based on the four corners of the document. Whereas what we need is a motion that allows a judge to look at new evidence, and that can only be done at the district court level. But I can tell you, I'm not going to stop. These issues need to be brought to light. A lot of our tampering issues we can prove to a scientific certainty, and this is by using top digital forensic experts who all agree with each other. We didn't just go get and we didn't get one or two. There's many different experts. I cited 3 of them in my filings, and they all concur with each other that the tampering happened. And again, some of them are proven to a scientific certainty.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
First of all, it's nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I was just curious. Is there any way to look at the porn that was downloaded onto his hard drive? Because that's basically what we're talking about, right? It went into custody of the FBI. The FBI downloaded stuff onto the hard drive and said, "Hey, look what this guy's been doing," right?
So, yeah, So again, like in terms of porn, it was one of Mr. Raniere's partners, and the only thing that makes it child porn is that the fact that they say that it was taken at a certain date. So somebody who knew her, looking at the picture, you wouldn't say, okay, this is obviously child porn. It's
so it wasn't like a collection of like child porn that's just out there.
It's a picture. It's a picture of a naked adult, but that because of the acts of data, when it was taken, they allege the person must have been underage.
So
I can understand that.
Is this a true statement those are the only images?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so then this isn't even a planting of child porn. This is the FBI creating the illusion of child porn on a hard drive.
That's why I wanted to ask, because I wasn't sure whether it was just like stuff that he downloaded that was like definitely child porn, or was this like a 17-year-old girl? I don't know about you guys, but it's hard to tell the difference between 364 days at 17 and 1 day at 18. It's like really hard to tell that difference.
Correct.
So I wasn't sure what the porn itself actually was.
Correct. It's 22 photos of one of his partners, and
adult partners
that
someone he was with her for a decade.
Yeah. So I mean, she could be 23 in this photo.
Oh God.
In terms of looking at her and judging her age, you would judge her to be much younger than you would think. So that's
the metadata that they went in and changed.
I'm sorry.
That's the data they went in and changed?
Yeah, correct, they changed the data of the pictures to appear that he was taken when she was 16.
So
that is so much worse than I thought.
Yeah, they created the child porn because it wasn't child porn when it was on there. They created child porn.
Correct.
I thought they also dumped other images, but it's just these 22 photos in question. They're all
correct.
From a time period when she was an adult. And the FBI created the illusion of child porn. It wasn't even, it's verifiably not child porn to a scientific certainty.
Yes. Put it like this. If she was truly under 18 at the time, none of this tampering would have needed to happen. So why would there be all these anomalies, changing dates and taking all this effort if she was under 18? They simply would have, planted it or something like that. They could have gone forward. All the anomalies have to do with establishing this date.
Yeah.
This is so bad.
Mm-hmm.
So bad.
Well,
I don't even know how to feel about that. Like I was not.
You
I
should
was not
feel
prepared for this.
offended in word.
Steve,
I am. I'm laughing because I feel
It's
really
uncomfortable. Yeah.
fucking uncomfortable right now.
Steve has two things going on. He has COVID-19, and he's finding out the FBI is corrupt, and he can't figure out which one is worse. So this was all in New York. Is that right?
Brooklyn,
Correct.
yes.
Yes.
The appeals court is in New York, and the lower court is also in New York. And then is the and that's all in Manhattan, right? Am I correct?
Brooklyn.
Both.
Brooklyn is where the Eastern District was, where the trial was, and then the appeal court is in Manhattan.
Yes.
And then the FBI office, would that have also been out of the where are these officers out of? Were they also out of New York, or were they out of California?
They're out of New York. Yes.
So this is all New York. You know, there's a person that I don't know, but I know of them because of a Supreme Court case, and I would love. She's a journalist. I would love to get interested in this, which is her name is Dee Halleck. She tried to submit a public access television show to the Manhattan Neighborhood Network called Crooked Judges, and they wouldn't air it in violation of her constitutional rights. And it went to the Supreme Court. We will talk about, since this is all New York, and she's an attorney from New York who knows all the judges there, I could see where she would be very interested in a story like this. So Dee Halleck, I'll put on our follow-up list. So, okay, so what are some realistic timelines? When are the next hearings? Oh, actually, let me go to this. So right now, the pending action is the appeals court, and you argued the appeal. Can you give us a brief summary of what the appeal argument was?
Yes. So the one of the defenses at trial, I think the only defense at trial was that there was no criminal intent of this group. Therefore, that would have countered the RICO charges. So the defense attorney at trial, was not me, it was somebody else, was in the middle of talking to the government's key cooperating witness. And he asked a question, and he's trying to get into, what was your mindset when you were at Nexium? What was your mindset when you were at DOS? Were you trying to break the law? Or were you trying to make the world a better place? And had he established simply that their mindset was that nothing criminal, that would have been a complete counter to the RICO charges, which is the racketeering charges. And the judge heard the question, and the judge said, okay, you can answer that to the witness. The witness started to answer and was going down a path that would have helped out the defense. And the judge cut her off and undressed the defense attorney in front of the jury, told him, you can't ask any more questions. And then after he was done doing that, he turned to the government and said, do you have any questions? The government said, no questions. He said, are you sure? Are you sure you don't want to ask any more questions? And so, here, a judge...
The judge is doing the prosecution's job for them.
Well, and not only that,
Correct.
She was crying, and that's why he interrupted her, and he said, I'm a human first and a judge second. This woman is broken. This is not DOS, he said to Mark Agnifilo, taking complete side, the job of the prosecution, and supposedly because of a humane feeling, he interrupted it, and then goes to the prosecution and, you have nothing else? And they say no. And he says, nothing else? Very humane. He wanted to bring the dogs back on her.
Yeah, but so the humane thing was a justification that he gave later after he cut her off. And because the defense attorney said, hey, judge, I don't know why you cut me off. And the judge said, well, he was trying to go with composure break. But yet, if you read the record, he was trying to get the government to ask her more questions. And then he tried saying that, well, I had to cut her off. So he used two different explanations for cutting off the witness. One was, as Eduardo just said, that I'm a human. She was, she needed a composure break, basically. But again, the record proves that to be a lie. And then the other reason was he was saying, well, you were going down into a legal territory that isn't permissible. Well, he heard the question. He said to the witness, you may answer. So that's a lie as well. So
he just didn't like the answer.
Yeah, exactly. He didn't like the answer.
Well, then what is the timeline? What's the next in the legal timeline in these cases? The next thing is obviously something should be happening with the appeals case. When will we hear from that, and what is that?
That's unpredictable. It's up in the air, but I can tell you that I do not intend to sit around and wait for the appellate court to make a decision. They're deciding on completely different issues. This issue of tampering is provable, and it's very concerning. And we need to keep pushing this issue. The public needs to know exactly what happened, and I can prove this in a court of law. So I don't know. I don't have. Well, I do have some plans right now. I don't want to give away my strategy right now, but we're going to keep pushing.
And what is DOS? What is DOS, Troy?
I'm going to say it, and then we'll see if
Nikki Klein is going to be here at noon, so she can tell you exactly what it is. But it's a sorority, a fraternity of women.
Yeah, it's a spin-off group that, as far as I know, had nothing to do with Keith Raniere, other than he knew them, and they were all either subscribers or coaches to his content. Is that?
I just didn't know if it was a procedure or if it was a group. Like the way that you guys were talking about it wasn't clear to me what it was.
Okay, it is a group of women.
Yeah, it was a secret society within DOS of women.
Well, and this is a place where I will interject, because this is something of great interest to me personally. Is from my understanding of DOS, and Nikki will come in and she'll give a lot more detailed information. Is it was a group of women who were doing male pattern coalition building. We're all going to have we're going to have secret information about each other that we keep secret. Right. This is not something that is a typical female pattern coalition. We're all
brotherhood building.
We're gonna mark ourselves the way a military group might mark ourselves, or a sports group, and we're going to hold each other accountable to what we said that we wanted for ourselves and our community. Now, that's my summary of it, and Nikki will give us better information. But those are three things that men are not only entitled to do, but that they're encouraged to do. But somehow or another, you add a low frequency oscillator to it, and you describe the way every man in every military group in history has ever been, and suddenly the spooky music makes it horrible because it's women. And as far as I know, there was nothing illegal and nothing non-consensual. All of the brands that you hear about were all that was all done even by a licensed professional who did it. But these are things that men are allowed and encouraged to do. But when you find out that women are being held to account to their to keep secrets, to be accountable to what they said they were going to do.
Yeah, and the story that came out at trial is that Keith was branding a bunch of women with a hot iron like cows, people he had entrapped and had sex with. None of that is true. This is a tattoo pencil thing by a professional, a small thing. They did it to each other. Keith was never near any of those ceremonies.
And so this is a group of women doing what the Skull and Crossbones have been doing for 100 years.
You have judges that have it, and it's a proud mark.
Well,
or NFL players.
Historically, society has always been afraid of empowered women. So, I mean,
this is a case of sexism. Yes,
right. One could actually argue that the government is trying to crush an organization of highly empowered women.
That is absolutely true. And when you meet them, these are the most highly intelligent, successful, mature women you've ever talked to.
Yeah.
So at any rate, I'm sorry, Joseph, I didn't mean to go off on that tangent, but I think it's important and telling, especially in this time of hysteria. And when I first heard about this case, before I knew any of the details, before I knew Nikki, before I even knew, I heard the story that was going around, and I saw the press on it, and I'm like, all of this looks fake. All of this looks like somebody's getting set up here, and that this story is around. It sounds to me like a group of women who were doing what men do to be successful in a closed network. And that is deeply taboo, and it's a taboo we don't want talked about in society. And that's, I think, part of the reason why. I think Keith Raniere is sort of the canary in the coal mine on this, because it's not the only group of people out there that are doing this. He just happens to be the one that crossed the wrong people in New York in the wrong court system and have found himself in the crosshairs of arguably of corrupt FBI investigators and arguably a corrupt prosecutor and a corrupt judge. Now, obviously, you've got to do business with these people, so you probably can't say that as an officer of the court. But what do you think of that summary of how this ended up happening? It's obviously I don't have as much detailed information.
Mm-hmm. Again, I'm focused on legal issues. I have to be aware of DOS, but I'm more surfacely aware. I mean, that sounds like a good summary to me.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, and I think your focus on the legal issues is laudable. It's needed and it's appreciated, certainly by the people on the podcast here and in our audience. What else? Where does this go if you had to make a prediction now? And what are the impacts? What are the impacts if? My guess is the system wants to shove this under the rug, one way or another. Right. That's they're going to do their best to do that. You're not giving up. Eduardo's not giving up, and this, I think, I don't know if this is the first podcast you guys have done. And I hope that you use this as a catalyst to sort of improve your media chops and to start getting the word out there. And we want to support that in every way that we can. But what are the risks? What are the risks if this does get swept under the rug?
The risks are that the FBI is emboldened to do whatever they want. Again, it wasn't Joseph Stalin. It was his head of secret police who said, "Bring me the man, I'll find the crime." And that's exactly what was going on here. People didn't like Keith Raniere. He, angered the wrong people, and they said, "Okay, let's shop around for a venue who will prosecute him." A lot of state jurisdictions refused to prosecute him. They all said, "This is, consensual adults. You can't prosecute that behavior." It was only in a particular venue federally where this was prosecuted. And so, we can't let our society completely collapse. We can't let somebody be framed, whether they're popular or unpopular. We can't let them be framed for a crime that they didn't commit, especially when the FBI is so blatantly tampering with evidence and trying to stack the deck against somebody accused and when they're facing trial.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you framed it, because if they can do this to a man of wealth and means and education,
and when the whole world was looking,
everybody was looking at it, but there was a couple of stories that they threw out. Anybody who supports him is wrapped up in the cult. Oh, okay. Well, hey, I don't.
And Enrico.
And then Enrico. I wish John Davis was on here because he's actually prosecuted some RICO cases, so he would have some insight into uh, into how that was done. But yeah, no, it's uh, no one wants to get their skin pinched in the meat grinder of willful ignorance that is our criminal justice system, and with some certainty, uh, uh, Keith was thrown in hook, line, and sinker, pushed in by somebody or some groups of people. Now, I have heard, and I don't know if this is true, Joseph, if there's apparently been some difficulty with you having communications with your client while he's in lockdown. Is that accurate? Can you tell us about that?
That's a subject of a federal lawsuit right now. There is a different law firm working on that.
Okay.
In terms of prisoners' rights, but I can tell you, last time I spoke with Keith, we started talking about the tampering, started talking about real nuts and bolts. The line got very, very staticky, kind of out of the blue, only at that moment, and then we got cut off. You know, I get cut off from Keith frequently when I speak with him on the phone.
Sure.
You know, some
Very
of it might be
convenient.
phone problems, you know, cell phones. Some of it might be something else. So, but it happens a lot. So it's definitely very suspicious.
And then we have the fact that the next day after we filed the motion, the tampering, after Tully filed it, they scrubbed, they told him, we're going to scrub your list, and they cut his power of attorney. In the past, they put him for 97 days in the shoe for sending his love to Nikki through another inmate, supposedly. So this is retaliation, is what it is.
No, I'm hesitant to say anything that might make conditions worse for Keith in prison. But I understand that that's a very special facility where high profile and high risk, they use them, sex offenders, child predators. Ross Ulbricht is there as well. So these seem to be very special enemies of the state that are in for protection. Obviously, every communication that somebody high profile like him is going to have is going to be monitored, perhaps more closely than other people. But so he had his list scrubbed. Did I hear that right? So he had to rebuild his visitor list or his content.
Well, what that means is they cut phone communication with him, and it was key for his defense. But again, I imagine that because of the lawsuit going on, it might not be the best thing to get into details. But
of course.
I think the point is that the way the government is acting is preventing his defense. And they've done this ever since he was in MDC. There's so many stories. I don't want to get into another wormhole.
That's a violation of his civil liberties, though, isn't it?
Yes.
Like his right to attorney, right?
There's many things that have been violated that we could make one podcast about those things.
Well,
yeah, when he was put into the shoe, which is basically the solitary confinement, there are certain procedures that have to go into place before that happens. You get a right to a hearing within X amount of days. You can only be down there so long without a hearing, and that kind of thing. None of that was followed, and none of the justification really added up when I looked into that. Again, that is a subject of a lawsuit right now. But really, the point of the lawsuit is just to enable legal communications. That's all we want to do is present this tampering evidence to the world. I mean, it's true, it's accurate. If it happened to him, it can happen to anyone. And it seems like there are actors, every step of the way, somebody's trying to make it difficult. It seems.
Well, that would be the cheapest, easiest route to successful prosecutions I could think of, is being able to go into somebody's house with a warrant, grab a hard drive, and tamper with it. I can't think of anything, and it would be absolutely guaranteed. Your local FBI office could put out a press release. Nobody is coming to your defense.
And we learned a lot from the KGB and the Soviets, dude. This is something that the Soviets did all the time.
Correct.
They would come in, they would take you, they would steal you away from your family, they would plant
But
evidence.
that doesn't happen in America.
No, never would happen in America. No. As a matter of fact, Hannah Arendt writes in her book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, that what we're seeing is one of the signs of a tyranny coming to existence, which is the end of the nation state and the end of what was it? It was the end of the nation state and the end of the rights of man. That chapter there alone was kind of investigating what happens when we go through this tyrannical overthrow of our system, is that we slowly erode the rights of man within the nation state, and then you erode the nation state, right? So then no one has the ability to protect and defend themselves against the state.
Right.
So yeah, sorry. That's
No,
one of
I think
those
you're correct. That's what it's a stake here.
Yeah. My reading is really centered around like communist era Soviet history, how to observe society and to be aware when it becomes tyrannical. So a lot of my reading material is centered around being able to identify when a tyranny is actually happening, and to be able to identify it and to call it out for where it is. And so that's why when I add these tidbits of information, which I'm able to since I'm not at work, because I'm limited by the amount of stuff I can talk about while I'm at work, which is I'm kind of glad I got COVID. But that's the center of my reading material. I mean, that's the majority of my reading material is centered around being able to understand the psychology of how tyranny happens and to understand the slave mentality that allows it to happen, and also seeing the signs and symptoms. So when I pipe up, I apologize. That's the position that I'm coming at and trying to understand what's happening so that I can identify it on my own scale of understanding.
I'm not sure, but I think when you have COVID, the current socially correct thing to say is, I have COVID, so I'm thankful for being vaccinated and boosted.
Well,
yeah, I'm neither of those.
if you're a good person, that's what you would say.
If you're a good person, you get the vaccine and then the COVID, and then you're thankful.
Yeah, I'm not a very good.
I don't want to go there. This is just
this podcast brought to you by Pfizer and Moderna.
Sorry, I don't want to keep creating.
Like all drug companies, have your best interests in heart. So to speak sort of to Steve's point, one of the reasons that I'm very interested in some of these things is wherever nation states have turned into tyranny, the bellwether events that you can tell is that they go after men first. Those are the first people they show up for, because once you remove the men from society, you can do anything you want to the women and children, and that's been true throughout history. And the worst part is nobody really talks about that element. And it was again one of the things where it almost looked like Keith was sort of being set up to be a prototype. Like, this is like they're testing this to see if they can get this guy, right? We're setting up this prototype and an archetype wherein we can go, okay, child porn, okay, media press releases, great, now we've got him in here, no one's going to defend him, and then we can get through the whole process of the whole process of getting a guy convicted for 120 years. How is that for let's say everything that was said was true, Joseph? 120 years, does that seem like reasonable sentencing?
No, it doesn't at all. Yeah. I mean, again, that would be something that you would give a serial killer or something. And in this case, everything was really overblown. I mean, the child porn is something that we could, prove in court. The RICO acts that they charge against everybody is completely overblown as well. They're abusing RICO, extending it, and like you say, making a blueprint out of it. They used RICO in a way that hadn't been used before, and once they used it on Keith Raniere, then they went and used that same blueprint against R. Kelly. And again, you could be, oh yeah, it's the exact same blueprint. So, and again, here they're saying that, R. Kelly's an easy example. They said that his crew was in the business of promoting him and providing him sexual, victims. And so they made the whole organization a criminal organization so that they could charge RICO, so that they could get around statute of limitations. But by that same argument, let's say that the president of Target stores was an alcoholic and had a few DUIs.
That's an actually reasonable argument.
Well, so, but then you could say that all of Target, every Target employee, because they work for the CEO and the CEO has a DUI problem, and that because he makes money off of everybody or she, and then uses that to buy alcohol and drive drunk, everybody who shops at Target, everybody who works at Target, every cashier, every employee, everybody's part of a RICO enterprise.
I do want to make sure that I put in this disclaimer. I'm not talking about the current president of Target, nor am I talking about any past president of Target. I have known a senior vice president at Target.
Okay, and I'm giving you a wild hypothetical.
Yeah, no, it's well, I live in Minnesota, and Minnesota is the home of Target Corporation. So it made me smile when you said that.
Okay.
I hate Minnesota so much.
I can't say emphatically that they're a surveillance company, but that's neither here nor there. So yeah, it sounds like everything was overblown, and it's curious that you bring up R. Kelly, because I hadn't figured that out, but it is again yet this. When I heard the R. Kelly story, I imagined in my brain the line of alleged victims that there were around the block who were paying to get access to be victimized. And then after all of those documentaries came out, how much longer the line got.
Correct. Yes.
Which again is like, we don't really talk, this is going to sound like maybe a stretch, but it almost sounds like this is an organized war on geniuses, where men who are out there.
We're next. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be low on that list.
None of you were depressed, right?
What's that? Yeah, no, I am not.
Nobody here is depressed, right?
I love my life. I love my life. For the record,
I would like to state for the record that I will never commit suicide.
Yep,
agreed.
Right there.
Well, no, it's very similar to, you look at John McAfee, right?
Yes.
I actually did an interview with Adam Kokesh, who had another very similar situation where for political reasons, there was sort of he was taken out by a false allegation. And it was the same sort of model that we're seeing with Johnny Depp. And then Marilyn Manson, of course, is an interesting one as well, where this is, I don't know, you're probably not super familiar with that one, John, other than they used his case, this false allegation against him that also has planting of child porn evidence on his computer, but they used it to change the statute of limitations in California. They used this to lobby against this. And this seems like it's a takedown, like it's a deliberate takedown of people who are of men who are high profile.
It's definitely happening in the entertainment realm. I mean, definitely the messages that are happening to women and to men. I think, watching the Yuri Bezmenov videos on YouTube are informative. Black Pilled, I think, is a good channel that talks about the different social messaging or social engineering going to women and to men in popular entertainment and going out through the decades. Academy of Ideas, I think, on YouTube is really good. That talks about how a society devolves into tyranny. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely happening. I mean, modern entertainment is extremely hard to take in once you are aware of the messaging that's going on, because that's all you can see nowadays.
I can verify Mr. Tully's opinion on that. I've watched all of those channels, and he's dead on. Phenomenal channels to watch.
And again, those were Yuri Bezmenov.
Yuri Bezmenov was a Soviet defector.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, he talks about subversion. So you would just look him up in a search engine. And then Black Pilled talks about the social messaging or social engineering of men and women. It talks about, like, how you're talking about men are being taken down, physically and locked up.
Yep.
This is more of a social engineering takedown of men. And then also social engineering takedown of women, and just to make everything kind of dysfunctional. And then maybe Black Pilled kind of dovetails well into Yuri Bezmenov, which dovetails well into the Academy of Ideas.
So I'm not in outer space when I say this looks like if not a coordinated, certainly a cultural effort at bringing down, getting sort of this idea of weaponizing women against men in the broader culture.
What should scare you even more, Troy, is that it's possible that this is not intentional. That should scare you way more than if it was intentional.
It is actually a thing that I've given significant consideration to. Now, Joseph,
scares the shit out of me.
Are you still in Fresno, or are you in Bay Area, or?
So I'm a native Bay Area resident.
Okay.
I moved to Fresno after law school, and then I moved back to the Bay Area to start my own practice. And then now I'm actually in Redding, California, which some of you may know as the 51st state of the Union, called the state of Jefferson. So it's very different than the Bay Area. So we're expanding the practice. So we have an office in the Bay Area and an office in Redding now.
Okay, so you've been in Fresno, you've been in the Bay Area, so you're probably familiar with the Duluth model of power and control, if you've done any family court or criminal courts.
I'm not familiar with that term.
Okay, we'll go in. We've gone into it quite a bit on this podcast, but it's kind of a Kafka-esque, literally based on Marxist feminism model that's prevalent throughout California and the Union, but that started here in Minnesota as well. But we'll go into that at a different time, because it is telling, because it's sort of it's some of these systems that seem to be blueprinted. There's a blueprint for basically undermining men and really to help drive these broader hysterical narratives throughout the society. And Steve, I think I'm right in line with you. It's like, what if this isn't? It's more terrifying to think that this is something that's happening organically than something that might be happening as a function of a deep state or a foreign state action.
Right, because you could know who to fight if it was intentional, but if it's unintentional, it's decentralized. It is nothing but fear-inducing. This is the type of shit that makes you not sleep.
Yeah, except you can look at the Tavistock Institute. You can look at various Marxist writings. You can look at a lot of the Ford Foundation, a lot of things that come out of the Rockefeller foundations, and they talk about their blueprint. I mean, there's a book. Oh, Jay Dyer did a breakdown of a book. He does great breakdowns of books, like Carol Quigley, Tragedy and Hope. He did a great breakdown of a book. It was a French author, basically like the French Henry Kissinger, A Brief History of the Future. And they talk all about, these plans openly. You know, we need to break down men. We need to break down society. We need to transform it. It's all about power and control. And you're exactly on point. These are the steps that they take to get there.
Well, the biggest key is actually transforming the populace into a victim. It is transforming them into saying that you are all victims of this other thing, right? And when you do that, you create the fertile ground by which to grow dissent, right? And this is what you see when you have so many victims. Everything is the enemy, right? And Nietzsche spoke to this quite clearly about the slave mentality. Is when you have the slave mentality, the master, all the things that make up the master, right? All the characteristics, you then begin to what's the word for it? You begin to uphold the values that the master is not. So if the master is smart and intelligent, you tend to praise stupidity and ignorance, right? When the master is for law and order, you begin to uphold the ideals of vengeance and excuse me, and the like, right? So you begin to value those things that are not the master.
Okay.
And that's where you get this victimhood mentality, where everything that makes you a victim empowers you to break the system down that you are currently residing in. And that's the most dangerous aspect of that.
Interesting, because that is how George Soros, that's always the blueprint or the kernel of his color revolutions. Is he'll come in and he'll focus on, I mean, they take causes that are justifiable. You know, I don't want to see discrimination against gay people. I don't want to see victims of police brutality, but they'll come in and they'll hone on that and cultivate it. You know, it'll start with, you know, trans people aren't being treated fairly, you know, in Italy or Greece. And that's how they foment their color revolutions.
Now, there will be people who, as soon as they hear George Soros say, their eyes glaze over. There is something that I would mention. In Minneapolis, we had a nonprofit called Yes for Minneapolis. That was the defund the police movement. That was specifically funded by the Open Society Foundation. Mm-hmm. So, while there are people who listen to us here in Minneapolis who their eyes would glaze over if they heard George Soros, they've certainly heard of defund the police, and they've heard of Yes for Minneapolis. And that was a nonprofit that was set up with $500,000 specifically just to lobby for that. So we're being joined now by Mark Elliott and Sunil Chakravarti. Am I saying that right?
Yes. Nice to be here. Thanks, Troy.
I did better than I did with Asun Solo.
Yeah. Eduardo still hates you about screwing up his name, Troy.
Well, and the number of times I've spelled it wrong even is embarrassing. So I am going to ask you guys, this is, if you're not talking, to press there's a mute button on the interface that just keeps down the noise. But which one of you wants to go first? Mark?
Well, go for it. I think it'd be great if Sunil. I know I've been hearing on and off, and I know that Eduardo's talked a bunch about Sunil and how he's played a role. So go for it, Sunil.
Excellent.
Yeah, I mean, sure. If I could say a few words, like I said, Sunil is highly responsible for catching the government, the tampering. He's a mathematician from Harvard and also a passionate soul for justice. So he was able to bring a lot of these things to Tully and Kuiper and the people that filed it. And, he's Keith's power of attorney and one of his best friends and one of my best friends as well. And I could say with confidence that none of these would have happened without Sunil. So thank you for coming, man.
Excellent. Thanks. Sunil, I'll hand it over to you. How did you get here and where are we at?
Yeah, sure. So, and thanks, Eduardo, for such a resounding introduction. I guess to be brief, I took some courses with one of Keith's companies called Executive Success Programs. I think probably some of you are familiar, and that's where I met both Eduardo and Mark, who were trainers in the company. That was about a year before the New York Times article that kind of launched the media scandal and the subsequent investigation came out. So I got to see the organization at a time where it was under so much scrutiny and people were leaving and saying all these salacious things. And I got to meet, most of the cast of characters and seeing a pretty absurd level of discrepancy between what the media was reporting and what I was experiencing firsthand. So I enjoyed the classes, and I was obviously sad when the company shut down. I found them to be very helpful for me, my business, my family, my friends. And I decided to attend the trial to see for myself, what was this horrible organization that I was associated with. And I ended up going to the trial most of the days with Eduardo. I went for the whole trial, 6.5 weeks. And yeah, it was just very fascinating and horrifying. And, I could get into it much more, but, I'd never been to a trial before. I watched it dutifully, took notes. I'm a good Indian boy, I guess. So I take my notes and study them and whatnot. So,
Sure.
And my background's in math and computers. I had a software company. So when it got to the testimony that was like the hardest part of the case, both for friends of Keith, for the organization, the community, was the alleged child pornography. And I was expecting, the whole courtroom went to sleep, and I was like wide awake because it's my field. And I just noticed a lot of things that were very off about the testimony, in particular, some things that were blatant lies. And that really troubled me. So I ended up meeting Keith. He told me that, he alleged that the evidence was tampered with. And we began this journey of, 2.5 years to prove it. So I guess that's the short of it. Maybe not so short, but.
Yeah, we'll circle around to some of the court. We're also being joined by Nikki Klein. Nikki, if you can hit your mute button. And then go ahead, Mark. Tell us who you are and how we got here.
Great, nice to meet you. Thank you for having us. It's great that you were able to connect with Eduardo and give us the platform. But my short story is I'm from St. Louis, and growing up in St. Louis, I lived with Tourette syndrome for about 20 years. And I ended up becoming an inspirational speaker all across the country, talking about compassion and tolerance. And while I was on my speaking tour, I ended up finding some people that also were in executive success programs. Eduardo, have you talked to him about ESP versus Nexium?
Go ahead and give us a breakdown. We've skimmed on it.
Yeah. Just briefly, Nexium is the word that is out there. It's just, Nexium is sort of the parent company. It's sort of, I describe it as sort of like Google. It's like the name Google, and then there's all these companies under Google. There's Google Calendars and Gmail. And Nexium was set up in the same way. Nobody even really talked about the word Nexium. It's not something that we even said to each other. So ESP, called Executive Success Programs, was one of the companies under the Nexium umbrella. And I really enjoyed personal growth, and I was a speaker, and I went and took the classes. Of course, they have nothing to do with Tourette syndrome, but the courses were so unique, they were so eye-opening, so informative, so transformative, that as I was going through them, I ended up beating my Tourette's completely mind over body. So I started taking courses in 2010 with Executive Success Programs. I loved it so much, I ended up becoming a trainer. And then once I became a trainer, starting around 2014, we started to help other people beat Tourette syndrome. We tried to see if using the tools that Keith had created, the technology, and when I say technology, it's not machines, it's a type of talk therapy. That's a philosophical inquiry in how you, to help you build more self-awareness, is that we then tried to see if that technology, rational inquiry, could actually help other people with Tourette's. And we had extraordinary results. We ended up helping about 10 other people that had severe Tourette's, and we had the privilege to document the entire process. And a documentary came out in 2017 called My Tourette's. That's now on YouTube. So we'll have to make sure that you get the link. And so that was my journey with Nexium and Executive Success Programs. And as you've heard, I'm sure, plenty from Eduardo, it's been a very difficult few years, and we saw this hate campaign come against our organization, come against the leaders, and we from my experience, I just knew a very different story, and I knew the truth. So I've been able to have the incredible privilege to team up with Eduardo and Sunil and Nikki and a few others to really try to expose the truth and try to expose the corruption and right this wrong. So, this is the trailer of the movie. So that's my quick story.
I'm being a bad producer here.
It's okay.
Excellent. And then we've got Nikki Klein, who I've actually spoken to a number of times, but I don't think we've ever actually seen each other. Nikki Klein holds a dear place in my heart in that I have never been happier to watch a character get shoved out of an airlock in my entire life. Nikki, why don't you tell us
Luckily,
a little bit?
I don't take it personally.
Honestly, if there were an Academy Award for getting shoved out of an airlock, I would nominate you in a moment. Why don't you tell us about who you are, how you got into NXIVM, and how we ended up here today? This conversation wouldn't be happening if it weren't for me watching Scott Adams interview Nikki and going, yeah, no, I know this thing is bullshit and I want to see what I can do to help. So I'll hand it to you for a minute here and go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Nikki Klein. I started my career as an actor. I was on the TV show Battlestar Galactica. I played Callie, and Troy was not a fan, which I'll just take as a compliment to my acting ability because we've since become friends. So I started taking classes with executive success programs in 2005. So I enjoyed them. I found them really transformative and enlightening, and just gained a lot of insight into my own process and became more clear on what I really wanted to do. Not just what I thought I should do or what I could do, but really more clarity about what I wanted, what my values were. And the amazing thing is they have these tools that help you make choices that are more consistent with your higher values and overcome limiting beliefs. As Mark said, he was able to overcome his Tourette's, which I think is just a very tangible, obviously visible kind of limitation that some people have, but we all have our own form of Tourette's, if you will, impulses, habits, patterns that might get in our way. And the tools that ESP offered were really profound in being able to understand what those are and overcome them. Over the years, I also co-founded a media company that analyzed news. It was called The Knife Media, and it was doing quite well and getting attention by people like Elon Musk and other people on Twitter who have quite a bit of influence. Unfortunately, when this whole NXIVM is a sex cult story came out in the news, all the companies under the NXIVM umbrella that were really just the consistency was the people and the principles of bringing integrity, ethics, self-awareness to different parts of our lives. And so a lot of things got destroyed when this narrative came out in the news. And when it first started, we were quite naive in thinking this was just a PR problem. We sat around being like, okay, well, should we say anything? Maybe it'll just pass. Sometimes what's in the news one day is out the next. And obviously that was not the case. The people who are very negative about either their experience in NXIVM or against the people, the leadership in it, they were quite committed to destroying it and to destroying the lives of the people in it and who started it. And it's very sad because it was an incredible community program, helped a lot of people, but the lies that they spread and the fear that they were able to instill in people who were either part of it or outside of it, it manifested in this narrative that snowballed out of control and eventually led to a criminal investigation and criminal indictments. So the last 4 or 5 years have been a crash course for me in the criminal justice system. I'm not sure who everyone else is on the call, if there are lawyers. I didn't know it worked this way. Let me just say that. I really thought we had a system of justice, that due process was a thing in this country. I did not realize how political, how motivated by winning and personal agenda the whole system is, and just how easily people can get railroaded, even when it has all this media attention. Like, of course, you think that, someone who has no money to hire lawyers, someone who, maybe it just gets lost in the system can easily get railroaded, but this happens in plain sight. And no one cares, because if you stir up enough hate in the media, as we've seen in our case, and surely others as well, then people stop critically thinking. People stop caring about rights. They just want to see people punished. And I think it's a very deep social and societal issue. And our case specifically, something that Troy and I have talked a lot about is where women's agency falls in all of this, and how this idea of women's empowerment that seeks to burn men at the stake is very disempowering in reality. And the infantilization of women is really not helping move our cause forward or help women be taken seriously. So that's a major theme, and something that I try to speak to a lot, and I hope that our case, as we bring more of the truth to light, can help with, because it's a problem.
And as we talked about the first time we connected, which is if a group of men had decided to do exactly what the Dossier Project did, not only would they probably all be running for Senate right now, yeah, competing against each other.
No, and maybe they are. There are most likely, secret societies or fraternities, groups of men who get together and, whether they choose to get a brand or a tattoo or do some sort of ritual or, pledge something as collateral, that is not a new idea. I think the fact that women were doing this, and the fact that women then contorted those things and victimized themselves, that is perhaps different than what men do. But you're absolutely right. If it was men who did this, no one would have sympathy for them. It would not be news. And people would just be like, well, too bad for you, if someone had regrets.
Well, and that's obviously the FBI planting evidence is bad. The potential of this idea of jurisdiction shopping to bring your case is horrendous. But there is this broader societal concern that I think ought to really be under consideration, which is, do we really consider women to be equal agents, equal actors under the law? Or if they do something we don't like, or is it the fault of this overarching patriarchy, or some man forced them to do it? Or are women fully responsible adults who can enter into arrangements and hold each other accountable to their obligations to themselves and their community? I think that's a...
Well, I think to your point, that would have been the crux of the trial. The question of whether women can make bold decisions and commitments and hold themselves and each other accountable, even if it's in ways that aren't maybe common or socially acceptable by some people. But that would have been a very different trial, and it wouldn't have been a slam dunk for the prosecution. And that is precisely why they needed something like a child pornography charge to, put the nail in the coffin, because there's no way anyone can stand by a child pornographer or someone who, has that. And that's, so I think that it speaks again to the whole nature of the conversation, or the monologue that the government and the media was pushing, is that, you know, Keith is a predator. And once you've established that, then, you know, there's no conversation to be had.
Well, and it is interesting because we are talking about a monologue. That's what's been happening since the outset. I've mentioned this a couple of times, but I'll say it again, which is from the first time I heard about this case, I went, something about this doesn't seem right. And it looks to a knowledgeable observer that this is the courts and some media outlets or some very powerful PR agency who was pushing this out to everywhere. Curiously, the one that really tipped the scales for me was the Electronic Frontiers Foundation, who, according to their mission, they would be the people who would be like, no, be skeptical of that digital evidence. This is a huge problem, right? And they were like, oh, it was multi-level marketing. I was like, wait a second. It was specifically tailored, like almost as if this was state level persuasion that was being done. And it looks like a monologue. And the fact that even these highly qualified, obviously intelligent people have had their lives thrown into disarray over this and can't get the local news to even pick up a story it should be terrifying to everybody. Why don't I hand it over to Eduardo here real quick?
Thank you. I think that what would be most helpful is if other people give you the views of the things we've discussed. Obviously, maybe some of the women have questions for Nikki and the stuff that you were asking before about DOS. She can speak of that. I thought Mark could introduce his story because in some ways it's undeniable. You know, even the people who brought this against us can't speak negatively of the work that ESP did for them because it's just mind-blowing. And I thought he could introduce the trailer and we could watch it and you guys can ask questions or the public can text questions, and because it is very powerful. And maybe if they want to watch the movie, that would be great too. If you have questions of the tampering, Sunil knows it, you know, like the back of his hand. And, you know, Tully knows the legality of the case, and obviously they have different schedules and they will be leaving, but we can make it very interesting like that. We could also hear another of the audios and talk about the challenge, but I was feeling that maybe watching the trailer would be a good way to just change the feeling, just to solidify how we've been little by little getting more of how this is historic injustice. I think when we watch what Nexim, what ESP was about, it sort of solidifies that this was just an injustice. So that's one proposal, but I think that for other people to share their perspectives would be more valuable.
You're on mute.
Give me 1 second and I'll pull up the trailer. I actually had the documentary up, but let me do the trailer. I think that's a good idea. Now I do want to go ahead.
Could I just ask too? Yeah, could you post a link? Because I'm sure that we all could share more of the live link, so that we could let other people know. Perfect. Thank you.
Absolutely. Give me 1 second here. It looks like Jewel Eldora's got that up in the chat right now. If you want to do that, so take a second.
Real quick, Troy.
Yeah, go ahead.
And I would be remiss if I didn't ask this, because it seems like this is a question that a lot of people would probably ask if they were watching this, if they had an opportunity to actually say it. Is the fact that you guys had a positive experience of this process that Keith invented, basically, is this evidence that it was a good product, or are you all just the beneficiaries that we get to see? Because we see those commercials of real estate ideas, and like, I got rich in 6 months, right? And you get to see like just the people who were successful,
the exemplars of success.
Right. Are we seeing the exemplars of success here, or was this a wider, broader example of success? You get what I'm saying? Is like, are we only seeing the positive, actors here, or I don't know how to better ask the question than that.
I think it's a great question, and I think Nikki, Eduardo, Mark, who were students, coaches, trainers in the organization much longer than I was, have a different perspective. The way that I was brought into it to a course was through a fellow Harvard alum. Took the course with a dozen or two people of different walks of life, from college students to successful entrepreneurs. And some of the people who, at least my impression, both with my past company that I had some of my employees take the course, as well as my brother, friends, experientially, anecdotally positive. But as far as the raw numbers, I mean, there's somewhere in some lawyer's filing cabinet, thousands of anonymous questionnaires with very high satisfaction ratings. And the interesting thing is, the most vocal critics now, like the Mark Vicentes, Sarah Edmondson's, people who have watched HBO The Vow might be familiar with them. They were some of the most successful people in the organization, made the most money, the most material success, and were extremely vocal about their support. So I think that's a strange thing when you really think about it, of how could that be? For 17 years, someone touts the praises, does well financially, does well in their life, and then something happens and they do a complete 180. So,
well, you would think that if there as big as this was, there would be vastly more people talking crap about it than there has been, and it doesn't seem to me, because I've done some slight research. There doesn't seem to be a lot of people complaining about the system that you guys are talking about. No, it's very few people.
It's a handful of people, and they're they've made a lot of media attention. And anyone that does feel positively, whether they were a regular common person, or in some cases presidential families or things like that in Mexico, and higher level people in the US, the cost of being associated is disastrous. Right now, if you say anything positive whatsoever, you're personally a bad person and compromised in some way. So the silence is deafening.
I think, that's just the one point to add to that. I'm sure Eduardo has talked about this, but the reality is, they made it a RICO case. So imagine, you're a regular person, in a sense, taking a community college class, because that's how it was with the executive success programs. Most people just took weekly classes. Some people took sort of intensives. But imagine, you're taking some community college class and it's wonderful. And then all of a sudden you see headlines on the news that your community college is supposedly a sex trafficking organization, and it's doing all these horrible things. And like, you're just taking like great Tuesday night, classes on biology or whatever. So for most people, it's just the mere association, just to even say, hey, I took a class from ESP 2 years ago. People, feared that they could lose their job because someone could accuse them of supporting an organization that is this alleged sex trafficking organization. So people can't really grasp how the government terrorized an entire organization and a whole community of 17,000 people. That's why more people are not positive. Like what Nikki had said, my Tourette's, the transformation that happened with Tourette's is not unique, in the sense of there's other people, including Sunil, Eduardo, and Nikki, that have had probably equal types of transformations. It's just you can't see it as easily. And I would bet there's probably about 14 or 15,000 people out in the world that have also had similar experiences like that. It's just not worth it. They enjoyed their time. They had a wonderful experience, but they don't want to, they don't want to join the fight. They don't want to go against the US government. So
that's understandable. Look what happened to Keith. Nobody would want that to happen to them.
I think it's very astute what you have seen. There's very few people saying negative things because it was wonderful. There is a reason why billionaires, entrepreneurs, people from Harvard, doctors, attorneys, all the way down to nannies took executive success programs. They took it and they shared it with other people because it was profound. It transformed their life. they experienced more joy. It's not that somehow this was, we were selling snake oil. These kinds of people wouldn't be spending money, taking time out of their lives to go take a course like that. So it's great that you have the ability to see that.
And at the peak of the hate campaign, people like Mark, he was going to do a speech about tolerance and how NXIVM had helped him, and he was threatened by the prosecution. This was old Russian type of techniques to silence people who were positive about it. I personally went to Mark Agnifilo and said, I want to testify because I know these women and they're lying. And he was like, no, you're going to get caught up on the RICO. You shouldn't do this. So this is how we were silenced, and we're still being silenced. So it's you're right. There's a few people willing to do it, but there's many, many, many more. And little by little, they will all come out. There is literally hundreds and hundreds of people with thousands of hours of footage of saying how great this was. And there's statistics of, 98%, 95% of awesomeness by anyone who ever took the courses. So even the people who hate it, if you watch The Vow, it's hard for them to make it look bad. They have to say, well, no, it was good, but it was a front for something bad. So
yeah. Well, I mean, even if you had a 98% success rate and only 1% of those got invited to the sex parties, I would consider that a pretty good success.
Well, and Nikki and I have had this conversation before. Is I
mean, I'd be pissed if I wasn't invited to the sex parties.
See?
I think we all feel that way because none of us were invited.
There was no sex party.
There weren't any. The worst sex cult in history.
Right, the worst sex cult in history because nobody got invited to them.
You guys have one job. All right.
Do you know that if you Google, I joined this and I didn't even get the weird sex stuff.
Right? Exactly.
That's why I joined.
I came to this and all I got was this lousy T-shirt.
Is this behind some other paywall? How does this work?
We should probably start one since we already have the reputation.
You've got the brand for it. You're like number one on Google, right?
Somebody make a goddamn T-shirt.
If you Google NXIVM, it says sex cult. If you Google sex cult, it's NXIVM. So I don't even know what a sex cult is at the end of the day, but I think we're not what people imagine when they hear those
if
words.
Everything is a sex cult, nothing is a sex cult.
Right. It sounds like there was a lot of volleyball going on.
Yes, I know you love the volleyball.
So I do want to play this video by Mark. I do want to make a couple of things here. Is one, I'm personally, and nor is anyone on the podcast making any claims about medical claims. But I will say this to anybody who knows me by reputation and knows what my areas of study are. I have read all of Keith Raniere's patents, and I have some idea about what the training it is that he was doing. And I find the claims around Tourette's worthy of interest. And I know Jules going to be writing about it because there are a lot of psychologists who read Jules' blog on social perception. And I think that I would put my reputation on saying I do think there's something interesting around that is worth testing in a clinic. That's not to make a claim because I wouldn't do that. Tourette's is the thing I know a little bit about how it could happen, and I have enough of an understanding of what Keith's teachings and methods were to where I could see that interrupting the circuit that causes these sort of sympathetic seizures. Is probably not the accurate term. Mark would know more than I do, but I do want to run this video with Mark here, and then he can give us some commentary on what we're seeing here. So give me a second.
You have Tourette syndrome, a neurological genetic disorder that's involuntary and has no cure. So what do you think I did as a little kid? I believed him.
The first treatment was a blood pressure medication to relax him. From there, we went to a few different seizure medications, advanced to Valium.
He's used to not being allowed in movie theaters, restaurants, many restaurants.
The tics were loud. They were often insults to people.
A teenager traveling to St. Louis was kicked off a bus after an episode with Tourette's syndrome.
It's a disease where it doesn't matter how much money or how little money you have it.
I can't remember exactly what she said next, but at some point she said to me, "You can stop this."
My objective was to get results with 5 people and then try to teach it to someone else.
This is what we've been waiting for since I was like 8 years old.
We don't use any drugs. The only thing that we use is a talk approach.
They have to be willing to take a tremendous risk. They have to be willing to involve themselves in something that's new and different.
I always felt that my body betrayed me when I was 7 and I never forgave it. But I realized it might have been my mind.
It's almost scarier if it works, because then it raises questions. Who are you to tell me that I can't do this?
So Mark, this is part of a larger documentary that you were involved in making.
Yeah, so we filmed the documentary again. It's called My Tourette's, and now the whole movie is on YouTube now. People all around the world can see it for free, which is incredible. I do just want to say, I mean, there's so much that we could talk about, with Tourette's. And the fact that we've come on today is incredible, and I'd be happy to come on. I don't know if you guys are interested. I know it's not even specific to women against false accusations, but to do a whole thing about Tourette's would be incredible. So we can talk about a few things.
I will tell you this: Harry Crouch, who is the president of NCFM, is very interested in Tourette's, actually, and the largest. As I understand it, one of the largest donors for the organization, for the National Coalition for Men, is very, very interested in Tourette's. So yes, we will certainly invite you on for that.
No,
but I am
interested
in this context for sure.
Yes, I mean,
what about stutters?
The reality is what Keith created, I believe, can help out so many people with so many different types of limitation. We only had just begun to see the types of effects that it could have on different medical disorders. It just, again, was by happenstance that I had Tourette's and I came and took it. They started to see its effects on people with OCD, even Crohn's disease. I think at the crux of it ultimately is with any type of medical disorder, the question is it completely biological? Meaning, is it completely genetic? And then is there any components of it that the person has control over or influences or can participate in?
Right.
And there's this balance of it. The reality is I grew up living, in a world that told me, look, you have Tourette's. It's a neurological genetic disorder that has no cure. So therefore, in my beliefs about it, the way that I related to it, my identity was the fact that it was entirely genetic. It was just in this biological bin. Does that make sense? And when I went to ESP, what started to happen is I started to learn more about myself, about my emotions, about fears, about just everything about my human different aspects of my human psychology. Things started to open up. And so I started to begin to peer into this sort of biological bin and go, wait a minute, what if I actually do have some say in this? What if I'm actually participating in it? Not meaning it's my fault. But the question is, can I have more control? Can I have more agency to change, things within, myself and ultimately my physiology? And the tools were so sharp, were so unique, were so good that that was the case. And as I went through the courses, I found that I could actually beat my Tourette syndrome. The people that you see in the film, I would say most of them are down at least 70%. And I believe, these tools could be used for so many different types of things in the medical community with respect to anxiety, depression, OCD, so many of I can't even begin to imagine
pain
what we
management
could do.
pain management
And things like that. The saddest thing, and I think just in terms of
I struggle with a stutter. That's why I ask. It's like if I get really, really emotional, because I've done some victim advocacy in the past, and when I get really, really emotional, my stutter comes out quite badly. And I still struggle with it to this day, even when I'm not super emotional. And I've just learned ways of managing it. Like even now, like you can't tell that I'm stuttering because I've managed to manage it well enough that it's not obvious. People just think it's the way that I talk. But I've just simply masked it. I've band-aided it to the point where people can't tell that I have a stutter, but I do have a stutter. And so that's why I'm curious, if this works with Tourette's, what can it do for other people who have other different issues like a stutter?
Yep.
Because I would love to be rid of my stutter.
I mean, the answer is, I think if you believe that there are certain aspects that you have the awareness that your emotions, being stressed out affects it, our tools definitely can help people. Can definitely help people if they recognize that. It doesn't mean that it would work for everyone. Just like with somebody who's overweight, they could have the best trainer in the whole world, but if the person doesn't want to change, then we can't help them. I think that's also sort of the irony about sort of this whole cult thing and that we control people, is that ESP was really the antithetical to that, is that we didn't tell anyone, the education didn't force anyone to do anything. We didn't tell people how to live their life. It was an education to help ask people questions for people to come to their own conclusions about their own life. So it's not like somebody says, if I have a stutter, it's not like I know that we for sure can help you. A lot of it is dependent on the person and how much they want to change and grow.
Yeah, you'd be risking litigation if you were making claims like that.
Of course.
But I'm interested to see, some other time other than now.
Yeah.
I'm definitely interested to see what the process looks like, because if you can help more people with more issues, it seems to be blunt, it seems damn selfish to hide that from them.
Well, just a couple of just things I'll say to bring it to the bigger picture is, I mean, that is one of the reasons why I'm fighting so hard. I think, I want to be able to help people with Tourette's again one day. But the reality is, unless we expose the injustice that happens, right now in the world, NXIVM is seen as this quote unquote criminal organization that has done all these horrible things and actually hurts people. When you just saw in this trailer and, seeing me, we were doing the complete opposite. And oftentimes people will say, well, even to Sunil or Nikki or Eduardo or to me, why don't you guys just go start your own thing? Why don't you go restart NXIVM? And it's like, well, it's just not that easy. I mean, right now, as Eduardo had said, even for me just speaking publicly, Moira Kim Penza, who was the federal prosecutor at the time, she had called my attorney and said that if I go through with this presentation, that she would throw me in jail. So it's vital that we expose this injustice and that we right this wrong so that, eventually we can actually bring back the education and help people in this way. I don't want to be, operating in the shadows, afraid of the government for the rest of my life. We need to expose this, and then hopefully, yes, we can help a lot of people. And just the last thing I'll say on the Tourette's thing, I think, there's a reason why, with, the FBI, has planted this type of, helped participated in the planting of the child pornography. It seems that the prosecution might be implicit in that. It's unclear. But I don't think it's random that here you have them tampering with evidence, and also that they would then try to suppress the Tourette stuff from the trial. Sunil or Eduardo could probably talk to this more because you guys were there. But if the prosecution were really trying to find the truth and they weren't just trying to control and put out a very specific narrative, why would the prosecution not want the world or the jury to know about the Tourette stuff? And the same thing goes for a lot of the documentaries out there. Seduced is one of the documentaries that came out. And I filed a defamation lawsuit against Lionsgate and Starz for how they portrayed me. India was a good friend of mine, but in this documentary, they made sure to really destroy my character by making it seem like I support sexual assault against women. And even after my face is on the screen with a testimonial, I think it's like 7 seconds later, they have footage of an ISIS terrorist training camp making claims that somehow the techniques used in NXIVM were the same types of processes used in a terrorist training camp. And I kid you not, there's footage of a terrorist training camp with children. There's a reason why the prosecution, why the FBI, why these documentaries are trying to suppress something like the Tourette's. And just the reason is because it's completely antithetical to the narrative. It's totally opposite that NXIVM is hurting people. And they wanted to make sure that no one would know about that. So I think that's how it relates, particularly just to this conversation of, if we actually were doing, if we were bad, why would they try to suppress and silence things like this? So I know I just said a lot there, but I think it's important to like I said, because you could go down a rabbit hole with the Tourette's, and I would love to come back, but I want to make sure that we keep it relating to the injustice that's going on.
No, we're definitely going to take you up on your offer to come back and talk about.
Yeah, and I think it's good, Troy, that you're writing down these things because the contact of the association, the other contact that you talked about earlier, and then these articles that Jewel wants to write, we can follow up on each one of these things. I think it's great that these are coming up, and then we can have a special show about Mark, and he can help write those articles, and we can follow up with your contacts. And just if you write it down, that's great.
Yep. So do we want to go to Sunil or to Nikki next to talk about your interactions with the organization?
I mean, I mainly describe mine. I was like a year, so it's not like particularly lengthy. I think maybe Nikki.
Well, I do want to ask you a couple of questions about that, but I'll save my questions until after Nikki, because I think everything is going along. It's from what I understand of the reality of the story outside of the state's monologue is it sounds to me like everything was going along just fine until a bunch of women decided they wanted to empower themselves using these things that are working for the boys, so to speak, or under the direction of boys. Maybe I'm simplifying that, but I'm interested in this is the part. This seems to me to be the part that both the media, the documentaries, the media and documentaries, as well as the state, kind of zeroed in on to really take over and make this a moral case instead of a legal case. And so I'm interested in some of the realities about that and maybe dispel some of the myths that are out there. Nikki.
Absolutely. Well, it's hard to know for certain whether DOS was a cause or just kind of the perfect weapon to hand over to some powerful enemies that Keith had accumulated over the years. There were a confluence of factors that came together, but DOS was certainly a central one. DOS being this women's organization. We called it a secret sorority. It started in 2015, and it was a group of all adult women, all women who were educated, financially independent, just to say smart, capable women who wanted to basically be part of something that would help their individual growth as well as create a network of empowered and powerful women who could support each other in, this ever increasingly insane world that we live in. Because I personally think, and I think all the women who are part of DOS also believe that women have a lot to offer, that we have a lot of qualities that are naturally, let's say, feminine in nature. And by building more character, by building principles of honor, of commitment, of really of self-reliance, that we could potentially do a lot more than we are, because society has a lot of imposes beliefs of dependency, of weakness, and different things like that. So not to go too much into kind of a whole philosophy of men and women.
Well, the thing is I think it's important to point out, though, that this is really in contradiction to commonly accepted gender theory. Of there's an entire industry around saying the opposite of that.
Correct. Yes, and I do think what we are doing in terms of having kind of this extreme accountability with care, that was a very important part of what we were doing that is not part of the mainstream monologue, as you say, which is to create a system where women can build character, honor, commitment, discipline in a safe, caring environment, as well as build trust with one another, which is not so common. I mean, it's kind of like commonly thought that women have deeper friendships, but when it really comes down to it, I think if you talk to a lot of women and really ask them if they feel that they have women friends that would have their back no matter what, I don't know that a lot of women would quickly say yes. I think that that's something that needs to be tested, and it's something that women don't necessarily learn to build in society in the same way that men do. So anyway, I was one of the co-founders of DOS, one of the first women to kind of like have these discussions around the necessity for it and my own desire to grow and overcome certain limitations through this process. And it really helped me. I faced a number of fears that I don't know that I ever would have really gone towards had it not been for the support system I had. And I'm so grateful for that. I mean, I wouldn't trade my experience for anything. And ironically, I think everything that I learned and the training, if you will, that I had through practices of DOS, through just, everything that we were doing has equipped me to deal with this disaster that we've experienced from the media, from the legal system, from friends of, former longtime friends betraying us. And, what has been most important to me throughout this whole process is that I can stand by my decisions and that I maintain my integrity and that I don't fold to social pressure, that I don't use victimhood to try to get out of responsibility, and that I really, hold true to my beliefs and my principles and what I know happened and the goodness that I know and that I see in others, that I don't use hate or or gossip or, go around talking trash about people, because I certainly could. And, but that's just not the type of person I want to be. That's not what I want to promote in the world, but it does put you at a disadvantage in the greater, game of things, if you will, because of what currencies are, that people like to trade. They like to trade in gossip and talking trash about people and seeing their demise. But I still, I'm the only one who has to put my head on the pillow at night. And I feel proud of what this group that was on this call, what we're doing to expose the injustices, what we're doing to promote women's agency as part of the Dossier Project. And, we'll see. The saying goes, the truth will prevail. And I believe it. I don't know if it'll be in our lifetime, but I do believe in it.
Well, we're just about ready to lose Joseph here. And so I want to get a closing legal commentary from him before we lose him. And then we can circle around on some of those issues regarding to the injustice of what happens and how it is, what we can do about it. So I'm going to hand
and
it
thank you, Tully. I know you're busy, so thank you.
And make sure you put in a plug for your book too. Again. Oh, your mic is off. Yeah, hey Tully, your mic is off.
You're on mute.
You're on mute.
Thank
There
you.
you go.
I
That
was
was the
gonna
part where he
say-
was telling us all this great stuff about his book. But go ahead.
No, the book is California State of Collusion, but I haven't made a dime off it. My publishers have, again, it was an Amazon #1 bestseller in its field. I don't make money off it, but I highly encourage people to read it. As Nikki was talking about earlier, saying that, I used to believe that we have a system of justice, that due process prevail, that judges are there for fairness, that prosecutors are there to keep people safe, and certainly they would never cheat. And, police officers and law enforcement would, there might be a few bad apples that we see, but by and large, the system is good. And that just isn't true at all. Our system is run by ego and people wanting to inflict their power on others. So that's why I'm proud of the book, and I think it's eye-opening, and I would encourage people to read it.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us, and we're going to get back to everybody here.
Hang on a second, Nikki. It will happen in your lifetime, okay? We're going to keep working. Justice will prevail. We've got this, okay? I mean, I will not stop until something happens. And I just had a great idea this morning before I woke up, and I'm going to talk to Sunil about that later. But we're going to keep fighting. Justice will prevail, and all of you should keep your head up, okay?
Excellent. And I do hope, Mr. Tully, that you will circle around with the NCFM legal group. We're going to be briefing John Davis, who's our main attorney on this podcast, who couldn't join us today, but he's looked into the cases and the current motions, and we'd like to have you and him brief the rest of our legal team to see if there's something else we can do.
I'd be happy to do that.
Excellent. Okay, well, thanks for joining us. All right, so
thank you, Tully.
There's sort of this thing that happens quite frequently with me, is that whenever I hear people disagreeing about something, I look at where both sides are being optimistic and not acknowledging their optimism, and then I make a Venn diagram and I go, that's probably true in the middle, right? And so as a result of this, my model has become very predictive, but most of the people around me think that I'm cynical. And so there is this element of where, when I talk about the criminal justice system, the people around me go, yeah, you should take everything that guy says with a grain of salt. Yeah, he's right a lot. He's right a lot, but he says a lot of things that make us very uncomfortable. And there are a number of reasons for that, but the main one is because I'm always sort of looking for what's the thing that everybody's too optimistic about. And I have found that that's predictive. So I'm interested. I know, Nikki, you've been doing a lot of advocacy and talking to a lot of men in prison, probably some women in prison too. Steve has got, just popped off, Eduardo. I'm interested in what everybody's takes are. You guys all obviously have other things that are going on. You've had ways that this has impacted you. Frankly, Nikki, I'm gonna just say this, and I've never said this publicly before. I'm super irritated that they're not letting you into sci-fi conventions. That I've heard this publicly. No, and it sounds sort of dumb, but it's like, that's not only a way that actors in that field can make some money, but they can also touch base with their fans. And I have reason to believe that there are a lot of fans who think that this story is bullshit. Right? There's a lot of them, and it's really disconcerting to me that something that you're not even accused of being, other than associating with somebody, is having these impacts. So I guess I'm interested in, how has this affected you guys individually, what you're doing, and then what you're doing to fight back about it. I guess that'd probably be, and I'll let you guys take them in whatever order you want to go. But Mark's in the upper left-hand corner, so I'll go with that.
Yeah, I think, in terms of the, how it's affected us. I mean, it's been a difficult 5 years. I mean, never did I realize that, standing for due process could be so unpopular. Obviously, I grew up incredibly privileged. I grew up in Chesterfield, Missouri, in suburbia. So I've lived a very privileged life. Like, I didn't have a lot of interface with, I just had no interface with the justice system. I think what's the interesting thing that I can say is I used to tick the N-word publicly with my Tourette's. I used to just involuntarily be saying the N-word out loud.
I'm sure that goes over great in St. Louis.
Goes very well in St. Louis, actually. And I just say this because I now, just being unwilling to be hateful in this situation, just being in a situation where I am fighting for my friends' constitutional rights, trying to expose the FBI, trying to expose what the prosecutors did, I have experienced more hate now than I ever did living with Tourette's. And I think that just sort of captures, the difficulty of the situation. I know for a lot of us, we've lost a lot of friends. People that have known me for decades, don't want to associate with me because they think that, how could I be supporting someone like Keith Raniere? How could I be supporting an organization that doesn't even exist anymore, like NXIVM? So I think for me, that's one of the hardest things. I just you never really are prepared for dealing with that kind of hate and prejudice. But it's so that's hard, but it's not enough to stop us.
Well, and as Eduardo has pointed out earlier when he came on the podcast, and I'm a pretty firm believer on, is there has to be some line somewhere, and
this is it.
There's a case to be made for this being it. Sunil, why don't you go next?
Yeah, I guess I come to it with a little bit of a different perspective or a station in it. I wasn't really very involved in the organization. I came into the organization so close to all this disaster, and I had, very banal, like, techie life with a software company, East Village apartment, like, very granola. So I didn't think, I couldn't anticipate I would be in this situation. But seeing, really good people, really bright, good, kind people getting, metaphorically bludgeoned in front of you has kind of an impact. I got to meet Nikki, Mark, Eduardo in some of the hardest times of their life. I met Allison Mack, Lauren Salzman, Nancy Salzman, Claire Bronfman, and Keith very briefly, and was moved to go to the trial to see what's, it's something just felt very wrong. And obviously I had my own views of it, but I wanted to see the evidence. And then at the end of the trial, I had this thought of, I think I saw a guy get railroaded, and, what to do about it. I have, at the time, sterling Google results, Harvard background, everything an Indian family could ask for, a company that was going well, and all these various things. And I thought, should I torch that to become an alleged, brainwashed sex cult fiend supporter or whatever? And I took a couple of weeks, and Eduardo and I lived a couple of blocks from each other at the time, so that was helpful to be close. And I just couldn't turn away from it. It's like it would haunt me forever. So I went and I met with Keith, and I don't even know that he recognized my face. I think he sort of, because I waved and he came over, and the rest is sort of history. It was totally worth it. I've definitely lost some business. I had sold my company prior, so I'm just a solopreneur consultant. Certain friends from my college network think I've maybe gone insane. Despite my days being like this, Zoom, computers, normal stuff. So I don't think I've suffered as severely as the people on this call, as far as the loss of relationships and material damage and things like that. But no, it's just a privilege to be able to do something meaningful with, people I highly love and respect. So that's sort of why I'm here, and it's just awesome to be able to do something. Then the other thought that I had, just one final note on, is, I thought maybe I should wait later. Maybe I should wait till there's like, the what's become too normal of like a black man wrongfully accused on death row. But people have become so desensitized to that sort of thing. And I thought, what's a better case than the most hated dude who's got nothing going for him according to the narrative at all, and anyone who supports him gets risked with the worst kind of repercussions? Like, when are you going to get a better set of circumstances and media attention, totally nonpartisan, totally non-political? When are you going to get a better shot than this? And I believe it will come out that every single person is demonstrably innocent. It's not like there were crimes. Like, innocent, good people. When are you going to get a better chance than this? So I felt it was just an incredible opportunity, and a scary opportunity, but that's what I feel, and I stand by it.
Yeah, well, let's see how the Johnny Depp verdict comes back. Like, once again, you'll never get another better set of circumstances for people to go, this doesn't add up. How about you, Nikki?
So when I even think about or recount everything that's happened, it's still a little bit surreal. I lost my closest friends, my career, my reputation, my home, pretty much everything, and had to not just start from scratch, but do so while I thought I was going to be federally indicted. So I got a job at a coffee shop, and every time a man walked in with a suit, I'd go into fight or flight, thinking they were coming to get me.
Yeah.
And so it was very difficult. I've lost, friends, either because the government has separated us or because they've decided to turn their backs on something they dedicated their lives to for 15 years, or just turn their back on our friendship. But as weird as it sounds, I wouldn't trade any of it. I've found out who my true friends are. I've found out who I am and what I'm made of. And I'm sure, and I hope there will be even more tests of my character and what I can do to stand up for what I believe in and have those principles exist in the world. But I've certainly been given the opportunity to become stronger, and not just someone who says things on Twitter that sound good. I think the trajectory of an actor and celebrity / influencer can be quite shallow. So the fact that I've been given this opportunity to really experience an extreme amount of prejudice and understand the criminal justice system the way that I do without having to go to law school, although I may have paid about as much money in legal fees to learn what I now know. It's really a gift, and my hope is that it's not in vain, that we can bring forth the injustice and free our innocent friends from prison, and also change the system and help more people. I look forward to being able to have more time when I can, focus more on helping people in prison, helping people before they go to prison or when they come out. So it's been very meaningful for me, and I feel very purposeful in this, but it's still very surreal and hard to believe at times.
So Steve, you're sick, so I'm going to cut you a little bit of slack, but I do want to give you an opportunity to say something before I have Eduardo close us out here, if you want to.
You're on mute, Steve.
You're on mute, Steve.
Sorry. Yeah, the Rona's kicking in. No, as usual, I'm just grateful to be here and to be able to have these conversations and to get to, meet you guys. It's been great. As great as it could be to be discussing some of the worst legal precedents that's ever existed of the FBI, planting evidence and destroying people's lives just because it feels threatened. I can't help but feel really uncomfortable in my own chair knowing that these things have happened. You know, I've dedicated my life to making the world a better place. And I mean, for all accounts, I'm just a simple dumb mechanic, you know, who has a YouTube channel and writes some articles about some stuff, you know. But I've dedicated my life to making the world a better place and to bringing conversations to people about things that are important. And this is really, really important. Like, we cannot allow our government to bastardize justice. We just can't. And so, by all accounts, Keith Raniere could be the worst piece of shit on the planet, but he still deserves justice. This deserves to see the light of day, and it deserves to be seen by everybody so that it doesn't happen to everybody, because that's what's going to happen. If you allow it to happen once, it will propagate. It will happen more, and we just simply cannot allow that to happen. And so, as loud as we can be, as vocal as we can be, both in our support of the case, but also in the criticism of our government and our judicial system, both of those need to be extremely loud. And I think we're doing that work today, and hopefully we'll be doing it in the future. And again, thanks for having me here, Troy.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I can never have enough I can never have enough computer engineers or mechanics on.
Well, I give much better commentary when I'm not at work too, if you've noticed.
Well, I just played one on TV. Does that count? A mechanic?
A mechanic. You did play a mechanic. That's right. The most wussy mechanic I've ever seen.
Hey.
You didn't write that character. I'm not holding you responsible for writing that character. Eduardo,
yes.
How about you close us out here?
You know, I don't think I can say much better than what Steve was saying. You know, I think this country I am a dumb mechanic in some ways. And I mean, this country is founded by hard-working people like that. And I think that this is an amazing opportunity. I believe in that phrase that says, you know, never doubt that a small group of citizens, thoughtful citizens could change the world. In fact, is the only thing that ever did. I really think that that's true. And I think that for whatever reason, this situation, that's what it is for us. We have a historic opportunity of really changing things quickly. And I don't know what we did to find ourselves in this circumstance, but I do know that we need to take advantage of it. And that's what I intend to do. You know, these agents, these prosecutors, even this judge need to be held accountable. And that's up to we, the people. And that's, those are some phrases that I wanted to leave in people's minds. And these are very literal. And I know that everyone knows it, but I don't think people feel them anymore. I think we would need to recite them every day, like in school. But I want to remind people that we, the people, police the police. We, the people, prosecute the prosecutors. We, the people, investigate the investigators and judge the judges. It is our citizens' job. I know that this is something that has gone forgotten, but it is the key for our civilization. And I don't see how we will have another opportunity to uphold that vow, our job, than corrupt prosecutors and agents going against the people they're supposed to protect. I don't think it gets that good. So I think, I agree with Steve that the louder that you can beat the drum, like we do every day, every citizen needs to be doing what we're doing every day. It is the only hope for civilization. This is why we immigrants come to America, because it has a civilized court, and we have the opportunity to repair it and to restore good faith on our organizations, like the FBI, like the court. And I don't see anything better that I could do with my life. And I would want to invite as many people as possible to beat that drum, like you were saying, Steve, and let's all go for it, and let's indict these agents, let's judge this judge and prosecute these prosecutors. We have to do it for things to change. And thank you, Troy, for having us, and we hope we can make of this an even bigger window, a bigger speaker to say these things, to show them.
Yeah,
so thank you.
It's genuinely my pleasure. Since I first heard of this case, however many years ago, I've been thinking about how I might be able to do this. And while we don't have an enormous viewership, I think we have a pretty dedicated viewership. And the National Coalition for Men is it's nowhere near as big as the National Organization of Women. But it is a number of people who are very concerned about exactly these issues. And I do think that you guys working together and being vocal on this are really going to be able to bring a lot of attention to something that ought to be a major concern for us, because we're not just talking about one man sitting in federal prison. We're talking about the potential collapse of the entire system. So on that note, I'm going to see us out. If you guys can hang out for a minute, that would be great.